stable condition. Police say the cause is still unknown. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has tweeted, "My thoughts are with all those affected by the awful incident in Liverpool. I want to thank the emergency services for their quick response and professionalism, and the police for their ongoing work on the investigation." Members of the royal family have led the nation in honouring the country's war dead on Remembrance Sunday without the presence of the Queen. Buckingham Palace announced this morning that Her Majesty would be absent from the service at the Cenotaph in London after spraining her back. The Prince of Wales laid a wreath at the War Memorial on behalf of the Queen. This year's event has seen a return to pre-pandemic numbers of participating veterans and military members. The Prime Minister has hailed the COP26 agreement as game-changing, but has also expressed disappointment after last-minute changes were made to the deal. Leaders agreed to phase down, not phase out, the world's dirtiest fuel after requests by India and China. Alok Sharma has apologised to delegates after he was forced to rephrase the pledge on coal use. And the Prime Minister says there's still a long journey ahead.
My delight at this progress is tinged with disappointment. Those for whom climate change is already a matter of life and death, who can only stand by as their islands are submerged, their farmland turned to desert, their homes battered by storms, they demanded a high level of ambition for this summit. And while many of us were willing to go there, that wasn't true of everybody.
Polish military have gathered additional troops and equipment at the border with Belarus as a standoff over a migrant influx continues. Thousands are camping on the border along a razor wire fence. The EU, which repeatedly sanctioned Belarus for human rights abuses, has accused the country of sending migrants as pawns to try to destabilise the region. Well, you're right up to date. Now it's back to Mark and Tonight.
A very busy show for you tonight. My big guest question person is going to be Mark Meets. That's right, we're going to meet the former police officer and investigative journalist Mark Williams-Thomas, who exposed Jimmy Savile. He also investigated the murder of TV presenter Jill Dando. This is a man who leaves no stone unturned, and he tells us his incredible story at 10. In Uncensored, I'll be heading to the US and speaking to a top doctor dealing with the opioid crisis. Does Britain face a similar threat from these addictive prescription medications? It's dark stuff. You won't want to miss that one. In The Clash, is it okay to end your relationship if your partner puts on weight? We'll hear from both sides of that argument. And are the government ministers that are quoted in today's press right to think the pandemic is all but over? This is a set of rumours coming from the Mail on Sunday, suggesting that our top politicians think we're through the worst of it. We'll speak to top academic Dr. David Payton, who has crunched the numbers so you don't have to. Reacting to the big stories of the day and tomorrow's newspaper front pages is my amazing panel, writer and broadcaster Nikki Hodgson, cricket legend Monty Panesar, and broadcaster and journalist Emily Hewitson. But my priority, as always, is to get your views on the national television airwaves. So drop me an email now and throughout the show. mark@gbnews.uk. You know I love hearing from you. A big 3 hours to come. We don't do boring, not on my watch. Lots to get through, so don't go anywhere. So, as I say, a busy show ahead, and you'll get my view on the world today in my monologue in 3 minutes' time. But first to a big developing story that you'll have heard about in the headlines from Tamsin. 3 men have been arrested under the Terrorism Act in connection with a car explosion at a hospital in Liverpool, which killed one person and injured another. Our Home Affairs and Security editor, Mark White, is at the scene. Mark, what's the latest?
Well, this continues to be a fast-paced investigation tonight, some 10 hours after this explosion took place just at the front entrance to the Women's Hospital here in Liverpool near the city centre. Just a short time ago, we had reports of police negotiators moving in beyond police cordons at an area about a mile from here. Rutland Avenue is the name of the street. Now, in this same area, a couple of hours ago, we had a number of arrests. 3 people arrested, a 29-year-old male, 26-year-old man and also a 21-year-old man. They have been taken into police custody, detained under the Terrorism Act, where they are now being questioned by officers. And then that area, as I say, remains cordoned off as the investigation continues. And it was really just within the last half hour that we got reports that there was further activity there. And these plainclothes officers wearing body armour, but with the words negotiator on that body armour, going beyond the police lines. There has also been video that has come out circulating now within the media showing armed police carrying out arrests at that area in Rutland Avenue. The investigation has not been formally declared a terrorist incident, but it is at this stage being led by Northwest Counter-Terrorism Police as they piece together the exact events. It took place at 11 o'clock here today, just as the nation was pausing to remember its war dead. That, of course, immediately rang alarm bells. The Home Secretary has said that it is clearly an awful incident, that she is monitoring the situation and has appealed for the police to be given space to carry out that investigation. Now, my colleague Bradley Harris has been down at Rutland Avenue where those earlier 3 arrests took place. He's been speaking to local residents who understandably are very concerned about what has been unfolding over recent hours.
Well, so basically, me and my mate decided we was walking from our friend's house, and on the way we saw there was like a bomb squad in Kensington, and then we was looking on our phones to see what it was, and then apparently there was also a bomb in the women's. So we've also seen what's going on here and thought, is it all connected?
Is this a shock to you?
Yeah, you don't really see stuff around here like that. I think it's a bit mad wherever you live, you see things like this, isn't it?
Shocking stuff.
Now, as always with these investigations.
Yeah. Indeed. So, Mark, clearly this is an ongoing inquiry and everyone will want to know what the nature of this incident is, but we're still inconclusive, aren't we? We're not hearing from the authorities just what exactly is the background to what's happened.
No, they will have an idea, certainly, and I think the very fact that counter-terrorism police detectives tells you the direction that inquiry is going. The fact as well, of course, that 3 people have been arrested under the Terrorism Act, that there appears to be other activity involving armed police officers in this area, Rutland Avenue, this evening. But of course, they've still got a lot of information that they need to piece together. This was a taxi, we understand, where the explosion took place. Inside that taxi, the passenger, a male, died at the scene. The taxi driver was injured, has been taken to hospital and is in, we're told, a stable. He'll, of course, be questioned by police when he's fit and able to do that. He may have some valuable insight. They will, of course, have been able to piece together the journey as well. This individual who took that taxi to the hospital had come from. It is believed that it probably was that area around Rutland Avenue, but not confirmed by the authorities as yet. So they probably by this time know the suspect, who their suspects are. They're piecing together that kind of information, and we get in the hours and days after incidents like this other arrests that take place, searches of other properties around the local area as they speak of their prime suspect and try, as I say, just to piece together exactly what happened and whether, of course, importantly, there is a wider threat out there.
Mark White, thank you so much. If you're just joining us, 3 men have been arrested under the Terrorism Act after a man was killed in a car explosion outside Liverpool Women's Hospital. Of course, we'll bring you more on that story as we get it. Lots to get through, of course, a busy 3 hours, so don't go anywhere. You'll be kept up to speed on that story, but there's so much else to talk about, so don't go anywhere. And the email for this programme, mark@gbnews.uk. Shall we talk about the environment? COP26 wasn't much COP. After 2 weeks of hot air and with hypocritical leaders and billionaires producing a carbon footprint the size of a Yeti, we are back to square one. Now, I don't know anyone who doesn't want to look after the planet, pollute less, and embrace the economic opportunities presented to Britain by the green economy. When it comes to green innovation, we are already among the top global players. But I'll tell you now what I could have told you 2 weeks ago. All of those private jets didn't need to have landed in Glasgow. Joe Biden could have left his 85-car cavalcade at home, because without the likes of China and India participating in this green revolution, efforts by low-polluting countries like Britain are not just costly and damaging, but ultimately futile. How unsurprising that the biggest polluter by far, China, didn't even turn up. They were the elephant not in the room. And both China and India hobbled the agreement at the 11th hour yesterday with a request to phase down rather than phase out coal. That's right, phase down rather than phase out, just as we've committed to get rid of it altogether at considerable cost. And there's a big difference between phase out and phase down. I might phase down rather than phase out the number of pints I have when I go to the pub. I think either way I'll be staggering home afterwards. What else could we phase down rather than phase out? Eating biscuits in front of the telly, making regrettable late-night internet purchases. If only we lived in a world where we could all phase down rather than phase out naughty things. Now, we can debate the climate science. My mind is open. I want to hear from all sides. But it's clear that we are polluting the planet. The seas are full of plastic. The air is dirty. And we should think about a future beyond fossil fuels because they're filthy and will run out eventually anyway. And when it comes to green innovation, Britain might as well lead the pack, but only if it works for our economy. Only if it produces jobs, if it's affordable, if it raises the standard of living, and if it's in the national interest. But if it's about going it alone and committing economic suicide whilst others pollute for fun, I'm not interested at all. Let's not make the mistakes of the pandemic, slavishly following one version of the science, crushing debate and scrutiny, destroying economies and impacting the poorest in our society. The approach of the authorities in the pandemic has been top-down. Well, going green must be bottom-up. It's time to engage the public on this eco-journey because it's our money, it's our quality of life, and it's our planet. So we should have our say. Now, Remembrance Sunday is a national opportunity to remember the service and sacrifice of all of those that have defended our freedoms and protected our way of life. We remember the armed forces and their families from Britain and the Commonwealth, the vital role played by the emergency services, and those that have lost their lives as a result of conflict. We will never begin to process the horrors that befell the courageous men and women that fought for this country, that fought for the world. And the many heroes who continue to do so to this day, they must not be forgotten. Courage, valour, sacrifice, no words are enough to sum up what they have given to us. This is the moment of the year when we reflect on the values that we hold so dear and for which such a high price was paid. Now, I cannot, in all conscience, with this platform, not speak out when those values are eroded. Nothing compares to the horror of what happened in both the First and Second World Wars and in other campaigns abroad over the last 100 years. But everybody that has served did so with a picture in their mind of what they were fighting for. They were fighting for freedom, for democracy, for decency, for humanity. And if we don't govern by and live by those values ourselves, then it was all for nothing. The botched Allied departure from Afghanistan, which is precipitating a humanitarian crisis as we speak, is an example of the West rowing back on those values and rowing back on the promise of peace. Closer to home, the tearing down of statues, the rewriting of our history, the cancellation of our culture, books, sitcoms, music and art, and the policing of our words and thoughts or an attack on those values for which so many fought? In both wars, we saw off tyrannical states, but are witnessing in the West something approaching state tyranny on its own people. European and New World countries, some with their own dark recent history, are revisiting the ideas of segregating members of society based upon their medical status. Lockdowns for the unvaccinated. How would you identify the unvaccinated if they walked the streets? A chilling question indeed. Medical apartheid is now a theme across the so-called free world, with the rollout of measures like vaccine passports, or police state bullying of those who choose bodily autonomy. None of this is on the same scale as the nightmare of the past. These are not parallels of what went before, not even close, but they are echoes. And I'd love to know what those who fought in 2 world wars would think about some aspects of our current society. I'm not sure whether this torn, divided, and in some quarters self-hating country would be one they recognise. Those who bravely fell, who sacrificed everything, have left us a legacy. They gave us a gift. The only way we can repay them is to preserve that gift, to nurture it, and hand it over intact to future generations. Now let's finish on this. Do you remember this man? Here's a blast from the past. It's the government's former chipolata smuggler-in-chief, CCTV sex bomb, Matt Hancock. This prize numpty is back like a particularly stubborn case of chlamydia. The author of all of this COVID collateral damage wants to be the author of a book all about how brilliantly he did during the pandemic. It's alleged that he's looking for £100,000 for the rights to this self-congratulatory tome. Perhaps he could put that 100 grand towards the 34 billion spent on a test and trace system that didn't work. The fact that the book is said to be based around the theme of how I saved Britain from COVID suggests it will be the greatest work of fiction since War and Peace, and probably just as dull. Former Health Secretary, you didn't save Britain from COVID. A secret corridor camera at the Health Department saved us from you. Now, I will give the big man credit for the vaccine rollout, but otherwise, Hancock was the man behind the mask mandates, the man behind contact tracing, and the man behind our mad testing mania that continues to this day. Our European neighbours test a fraction of the population that we do, and lucky them. We may not have had Freedom Day on the 19th of July in England if Hancock was still in charge, because he was considered a lockdown hawk too. This guy should have had the book thrown at him months ago. He might have great expectations for this project, but I think it will be much ado about nothing and 50 shades of rubbish. I can only think of one use for this book, if I'm given a copy, and that's to prop open my rather unpredictable kitchen door. This is GB News. With me now and throughout the show is my fabulous panel tonight. So excited to welcome journalist and broadcaster and dating expert Nikki Hodgson. Brilliant to see Nikki again. Fantastic to have that reunion. We also have former England cricketer, a legend of sport, Monty Panesar, and commentator and activist Emily Hewitson. Great to have you all here. So, folks, where shall we start? First of all, Emily, Remembrance Sunday, the most important day in the nation's calendar.
Absolutely. And if I may, I'd just like to share a story with all the viewers at home. So I was on the way to COP a few weeks ago, which I know we're going to talk about later, but I just witnessed the most beautiful moment. So there was a woman on the train and she got talking to the boy behind her, and she found out that the boy was a soldier. He was only 18. And she got out of her purse, gave him £10 and said, buy yourself something nice. And I just think that really encapsulates the spirit of Remembrance Day. It's a time where we can all come together and remember those that paid the ultimate sacrifice for us to have our freedoms. So I just thought that was a lovely moment.
I think that's a brilliant point and a lovely story. And that's the point, isn't it? That's the theme of the day, Monty Panesar, the freedom we now enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Remembrance Day is, really, important time, in our calendar. And also, let's not forget, the Sikhs, from I think it was over 300 120,000 soldiers, you know, that were involved in both of the wars and from the Punjab area. So, you know, I think the British Sikhs at that time have done a lot, you know, for this country, and it's a time to remember, you know, all the communities, you know, from all the different countries that you know have served, you know, for freedom for United Kingdom.
Well, we still have so many serving all around the world, don't we, Nikki? So this great legacy continues.
Yes, it does. I think what's really important about Remembrance Sunday, actually, is it gives us a chance to remember the past and to think about the future and where we want to go in terms of peacekeeping. Because, you know, just because we're not in the midst of a very obvious world war, there's certainly wars that we are fighting. So it's important to remember the active duty of the soldiers that we have and to think about what we want our legacy to be in the next 20 years, in the next 40 years in terms of peacekeeping.
Well, I think that's exactly right. Nikki, will you be buying Matt Hancock's book about the COVID pandemic?
No, I won't. I'll probably just get a free one from the publisher. But isn't he just kind of touting the book at the moment? He's looking for 100 grand from somewhere. And maybe you can ask Jacob Rees-Mogg a thing or two about getting a book deal and it not selling, because he knows something about that.
Yeah, do you not think that politicians should wait until the end of their career before they start writing their memoirs?
Well, I think in Matt Hancock's case, he's probably afraid that he'll be completely forgotten, so he needs to do it now.
Monty, have you written your life story yet?
Yeah, I've got an autobiography out called The Full Monty. I think that'll probably be the only name for it. And it was out during the World Cup 2019 when England, you know, won that famous game at Lord's against New Zealand.
Just a bit.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Based upon the subject matter of the film, The Full Monty, have you been worried that people might have bought your book for the wrong reasons or be disappointed by the photographs in the middle?
Well, I'm sure they probably understood that when there's a cricket picture of me there celebrating and, you know, I'm obviously the title Full Monty, I'm sure they can know that it's me on a cricket field and possibly not in Sheffield.
Well, listen, I'm delighted that, of course, Monty's career continues apace now as a sports and news broadcaster. But Emily, what do you think about Matt Hancock's future? Do you think there's a way back to him in terms of the political front line?
I don't think so. You know, what he did was humiliating. At the end of the day, he broke his own rules. You can't really come back from that. Well, I do say that. There has been quite a few times where people have done even worse and somehow have got the top job once again. I can think of quite a few examples of that. So I guess who knows? But I do feel a bit sorry for Matt Hancock in the way that he did do some good things, like maybe helped out with the vaccine rollout. But he's only going to be remembered for that scandalous CCTV footage.
I think he will. Just going back to my comments about Remembrance Sunday, Emily, do you think that there are echoes of issues around freedom that face our current modern society? You know, I was thinking today about what people gave their lives for, why they fought, and it was about living in a free country and overcoming tyranny. And I'm just slightly concerned about some aspects of modern society, even in the West, that work against those values.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, like you said, it is very important to think about those values and what they were fighting and what they fought for, and to make sure that it wasn't, you know, all in vain or whatever. But like you said, you can't possibly compare the horrors of the war to what we're experiencing now. But in the same time, you do want to uphold those values. At the end of the day, they fought for a free thinking and a democratic Britain, and I think that's something that we have to carry on. We have to carry that.
Well, do you see, as I do, threats to that in terms of freedom of speech? You know, sort of extreme political correctness, which is cancelling anybody for either saying or thinking the wrong thing.
Oh, completely. It's honestly terrifying. You know, you have to watch everything you say this day and age, because you don't know what's going to offend someone. So I do definitely think that there's a threat. But I always say I think it's a pendulum. It might be swinging one way, but one day it's going to all come crashing down, and I can't wait for that moment.
What do you think, Nikki? Do we still live in a free society?
Oh, gosh, what a big question. Well, it depends how you define free. Definitely in terms of free speech, I think it's a bit of a misnomer that we are going through the most difficult and censorious time that we have done, because we don't live under a dictatorial regime just at the moment. And I know that people feel that it's more difficult to say certain things, but the reason that we started to have this whole debate is because actually we wanted to care more about sensitivities to other people's issues. And you could argue that it's gone too far the other way, but the impulse to care about offending people isn't a negative one.
And Monty, finally, in relation to parallels with the pandemic, authoritarian measures we've seen from Western governments. Look at Australia building quarantine camps in the desert, firing rubber bullets at people who challenge the Covid narrative. Is that a threat to the freedom for which so many gave their lives?
Well, I think, looking back at now how UK have been the leading sort of, let's say, country when it comes to, the rollout vaccine, program. That's something that I think other countries may, look to follow, seeing the success of it. But also, we've seen in Australia, in places like Melbourne, where the lockdown's been over, 250 days. And there it has been a threat, where they think that the government are dictating terms there and people there are not, getting their sort of freedom as it needs to be. And that can be a threat. And especially with, COVID, passports, which obviously we'll talk later. But, that's an interesting subject as well, because there's got to be a balance where, the government don't just continually sort of put pressure on what is right and listen, to the people as well.
Well, look, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Mark, at gbnews.uk. Tom has emailed and said, Mark, let's remember that there are hundreds of Polish soldiers who are policing our Western European border to preserve our freedoms and way of life as we speak. Tom, a brilliant email. Completely agree with you. Lots to get through. The emails are pouring in. Mark at gbnews.uk. I'll get to those very shortly. Coming up before 10, we're going to speak to Professor David Payton on COVID numbers and leaked plans for something called Operation Rampdown. We're hearing in today's Sunday papers that ministers think the pandemic's over. So we'll get the detail from the prof on that one. But after this, in The Clash, should you be allowed to dump your partner if they put on weight or let themselves go? I do hope Mrs. Dolan isn't watching. So you can vote now on our Twitter poll at GB News. Jump on there and take a look. It's all about your opinions. I'll see you in 2.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage. I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Lots of emails coming in response to the monologue. Mark, as usual, you are a breath of fresh air. Thank you for that supremely respectful and powerful defence of those fallen, the culture and way of life that they sought to protect and hand on. Bravo. Let's have a look at this. On the environment, dear Mark, says Carol, as always, spot on, Mark. Phasing out should mean being got rid of. End of. Phasing down is a euphemism for it's not going away ever, but you're made to believe that it will. And Remembrance Day should be an example of who we should be looking up to. Heroes from every country, not the globe-trotting jet set that we have masquerading as leaders. More on this. Let's have a look. This is Elliot who says, Mark, China is an extremely large polluter, except a lot of their exports are shipped to the UK. If we don't buy from China, we have to produce it ourselves. Either way, we pollute or are encouraging the climate crisis, and this results in the UK's carbon footprint being bigger. We just don't produce it here in the UK. An excellent counterbalance to the argument. Thank you for that, Elliot. What else have we got? So many more. I really want to get to this one in particular. Let me see. Right, Robert. Blimey, Mark, where do I begin? First of all, China was at COP and a major player. Second, the Paris Accord was signed off and ratified by all nations apart from Russia. All in all, a resounding success and a momentous historic occasion for the world. These are facts, not fake news that you keep spreading. Well, look, thank you for your thoughts on that, Robert. President Xi of China was not there. And of course, China and India put the kibosh on the coal deal at the 11th hour. But I do take on board what you've said, and brilliant to hear from you. So do keep your feedback coming, mark@gbnews.uk. And don't forget, at 10 o'clock, we're going to speak to the detective and the investigative journalist who actually unearthed the Jimmy Savile story. This is the man that outed Jimmy Savile. Mark Williams Thomas is live at 10. He investigated the murder of Jill Dando. It's an incredible story. It's dark stuff, and you won't want to miss that at 10 o'clock. But it's time now for The Clash, in which we tackle one of the big topics of the day from opposing points of view. A former Miss Great Britain who was inspired to lose 8 stone following a difficult breakup has said it's totally acceptable to dump a partner who has put on the pounds if they aren't willing to get back in shape. Jane Atkin, who won the beauty pageant crown last year, appeared on Good Morning Britain on ITV to discuss Alice Evans's claims that her estranged husband, Joanne Griffith, told her that he would leave her if she gained weight, while the columnist from Lincolnshire said it was totally acceptable to ditch someone who wasn't willing to get healthy again, especially if you don't fancy them anymore. Well, let's debate this in the company of Steve Miller, CEO of Fatnosis, a mindset and motivational weight loss platform, and Eva Believer, who is a very beautiful plus-sized model. Lovely to have both of you here. Eva, let me start with you. Do you think it's perfectly reasonable to dump your partner if they let themselves go?
Good evening, Mark. Well, first of all, I think I should state the fact. If partner loves you for your body, I have a bad news for you. He or she doesn't love you. Because body is something that changes during the time, especially I can speak for a woman because I'm a woman. And we go through lots of different periods in time and your body is changing. And you probably know that when you are in love, you see somebody with the different eyes. You sort of have like a pink glasses. And this is the chemistry. And it's something much more than the body. The only thing I probably would never justify, I think, is the sexualizing of a fatness, which comes from United States most of the time, as I saw on the news, you know, when women put on weight on purposely, and they even earn money from this, letting men to rub their belly and feed them. Oh my God, it's just something I never understood. But in any other case, this is so terrible to say. And I personally think that if your partner says, hey, lose weight, get back in shape, or I don't fancy you anymore, your partner must be manipulator, he must be narcissist or some sort of emotional abuser. So I think once you've heard these words, just say goodbye to your partner and go and live your life happily, because you shouldn't be with the people like this. That is my strong opinion.
But isn't there an unspoken deal, Eva, when you get into a relationship with someone, especially if it's a long-term relationship or a marriage, that you'll do your best to kind of keep yourself in order? You know, you sort of get your hair cut and you think about what you're wearing. And what you don't do is you don't hit the beer and burgers.
well, not always. We all been in lockdown. I put on 2 stone, during lockdown, but I successfully got married with a young, beautiful guy. And I don't think it's the point because, of course, it's the health. Firstly, we think of, and we try to go gym. We try to, do exercises. I always try to keep healthy eating. I need to have a good skin. I need to have good forms. Doesn't matter. I'm a plus size woman. I'm a plus size model. I need to maintain my measurements because half of the country's brands are sewing clothes on me. So I'm kind of responsible for that. I'm wearing a wig here, so my hair are long and nice. So I must say that, yes, I'm trying. But, I was born like this, and I thought, hey, I lived in Lithuania. The slimmer you are, the happier you are. Nothing. At my fattest, on the lockdown, I found amazing man that I got married with. And I can assure you that this is nothing to do with your body. Because you probably noticed that, yes, that you fancy somebody, you love somebody, and other people can say, oh my God, how can you he's just not type, but he's of my type. And whatever he's changing, he can lose his arm, he can lose his leg, he can lose his hair. It's not only putting on weight. Come on, people lose weight. My friend's husband had a cancer. He looked awful. He was terribly slim. And I was like, look, he lost so much weight. Is he doing okay? And she was like, no, but he looks all right still because she loved him. You see your partner in completely different way.
Steve Miller, you're the weight loss guru. I mean, losing your arm or losing, I don't know, your hair. I mean, these are out of your control. But keeping yourself in fine fettle, that is within your power. And is that an expectation in a long-term relationship? Steve?
I think it's about being honest with each other. And I think that let's say, for example, God forbid, Mark, you and I were in a relationship.
Never say never.
Never say never. Well, first of all, you'd be lucky. And secondly, but let's imagine we're in a relationship and I suddenly start to get fat and you start to lose respect for me and that starts to affect the relationship. Of course, we're going to talk and we're going to have some dialogue. And of course, that's important. But if I decide to do nothing about it and I still stay fat, even though I could do something about it, then your respect for me is going to go down. You're going to become unhappy. And I think it's absolutely fine to explain to me the consequences of me not doing anything about it. So actually, I think sometimes you've got to be cruel to be kind and actually say to me, do you know what, Steve? You've got to lose some weight because this is affecting our relationship. And and then we can do it. We can support each other. I'm for transparency and honesty. And I think it's absolutely fine because you see what happens, of course, is if I become really fat and the love life goes off the boil and all of that sort of stuff, then of course what can happen is you become frustrated. You might start to have affairs. So I think that open dialogue and painting the consequence is absolutely legitimate. I think it's fine.
Well, I mean, that's the point, isn't it, Eva? You don't want your partner to take up smoking or become a heavy drinker if that's not what they did when you met. You can understand a woman that marries a young man that's as attractive and slim as handsome as Steve Miller, but after a few years, he puts on a lot of weight, and you're thinking, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't marry Fatso.
Look, I must say I'm sorry because you invited me to your, to your program as a plus-size model, but I was very much into psychology, and I must say that before you put on weight, your love life goes down, and that's why you put on weight. So most of the time, I again speak for women because as I am a woman, so for most of the time, women living with abusive partner, emotional abuser, the one who doesn't watch and respect the boundaries, she gets in sort of kind of depression. The body changes, the hormonal changes happening. She starts putting on weight. And then it's coming up, oh, she's lazy. She doesn't do this. She doesn't. I know lots of women who go to gym, who watches their eating, but they never can lose weight.
up for? I've been missold.
But you don't look, Mark, if you signing up and living for somebody, you know, because they are slim, that you just want this, then you probably need to pay for somebody just to be your partner, because I'm going to live my life.
What might
And
happen,
at that
Eva.
time, look,
That might
but let
happen.
me finish. But
that
one
enriched
day, your
relationship.
One at
partner
a
will
time.
die.
Steve.
What?
What were you going to say?
Yeah, I think Eva, I think Eva makes some good points. But what I would say is that a couple of things I do want to pick her up on is it is always possible to lose weight. Let's not start saying that. It is very possible to lose weight. Everybody can lose weight. They can. But the point is that, you know, usually weight gain, actually, let me be blunt with you here, weight gain can often come from can't be bothered itis, and frankly, sitting the backside and staying in the sofa too much. Let's get in the real world with it as well. It's not all about this complex psychology. Why is everything these days about complex psychology and everyone's got mental health issues? Actually, let me be blunt. Yes, of course, some people have those issues, but also a lot of people are too fat because they are mentally
Really, I got on diet every year, every time. You know, I stopped because I really can't be bothered, as you say. But the thing is, if you are in successful, happy relationship, I really know that feeling. You wouldn't be sitting on the sofa. First of all, if you are kind of person who sits on a sofa, you wouldn't marry somebody who wants 90, 60, 90. Do you know what I mean? Like, ideal.
Yeah. I think you're great, but you're giving everyone an excuse.
You need, that's why, to test and to know your partner before you get married, because it's never happening miracle way that you married somebody size 8 and suddenly they size 28 after half year. It's something wrong. It is something clearly wrong. And it's not only COVID, as we usually blame for.
And therefore, you need to explain to the person that you were a size whatever, and now you're an unhealthy size 28. Let's work at it together. Let's do it together. Let's live, you know, healthy together, and you create that partnership. But if that person is not forthcoming, then I'm sorry, I'm out of here.
But can I ask you a question? So the person says, oh, let me offer you, let's lose weight together. But I'm just wondering where that person was when I was putting on weight, I guess eating together as well. So, because I don't believe that, especially during lockdown or, you know, situations like that one person was working hard and another one was sitting and eating because the person was so unhappy in such a successful relationship. I just don't believe in it.
There you go. Well, look, I'm out of here because the time is against us, not because you're not both gorgeous, which you are. Eva, you've made some great points, and what we don't want to do is fat shame, and also anybody watching that has issues around food, that is struggling to lose weight, maybe even has an eating disorder, that has to be taken very seriously. And if you're going through that, then do reach out. There's lots of help online, and you could visit your GP for advice. But if you want ideas about weight loss... Yes, Steve, go for it. We're only a few seconds, but what do you want to say?
Everyone goes on about eating disorders and we've got to look after people with eating disorders. Can we actually recognise the biggest eating disorder is called obesity? We're getting frightened to talk about it.
Steve, briefly, what does Fatnosis do, your company?
3 things. I don't like diets. I don't like them at all. I encourage people to live 80-20, 80% healthy, 20% a bit of what 80% healthy, 20% a bit of what you fancy. I also use mind programming, and motivational impetus and whatever. I'm not here to promote anyway, but thank you for the opportunity.
Well, there you go. Well, look, do check it out. Fatnosis is online. I also want to thank Eva Believer. Eva, how can people find out about your work?
Oh, please, I'm a voiceover artist. I'm a plus-size model, and I also teach in a musical theatre school. So please type Eva Believer, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You're going to find me everywhere at the same name. I'm the first Lithuanian plus-size model in UK.
You are going to get a lot of new followers. I've loved having you both on the show. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
CEO of
Thank you.
Fatnosis, Steve Miller. Thank you, Steve. And plus-size model, and it turns out voiceover artist and a very talented lady, Eva Believer. An interesting debate. So who do you agree with? Well, your verdict is in on our Twitter poll. 38.4% of you think it's okay to dump your partner if they put on weight. 61.6% say no. So there you go. We'll continue that conversation very shortly. But next, is the pandemic over? We're hearing that government ministers are walking around 10 Downing Street and Whitehall saying it's time for Operation Ramp Down to lift all restrictions next year. Well, we'll speak to the professor that's crunched the numbers so you don't have to. Plus, at 10 o'clock, there's still time for you to get your questions in. Investigative journalist, TV presenter and ex-cop Mark Williams Thomas, the man that outed Jimmy Savile. He's live at 10. An incredible story. You won't want to miss it. So email mark@gbnews.uk, tweet us at GBNews, or Facebook your question by searching for GB News. I'll see you very shortly.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
In 10 minutes' time, I'll be meeting the man who outed Jimmy Savile, Mark Williams Thomas. But let me get to some of your emails. And by the way, let me apologise because we've had sound problems on tonight's show. And it's the whole transmission. So it's my guests and also us in the studio. It's a technical issue which we are working on, but my sincere apologies. I know it's really frustrating. I'm as bothered about it as you are, but we're working very, very quickly on that one. And thank you so much for your patience and understanding. Jackie has emailed, "Dear Mark, after going through an early menopause due to emergency surgery, I put on weight which I found difficult to shift. My husband was so kind and supportive during a tough time. It never occurred to me that he would ever think of leaving me. What kind of a person would say that to someone that they're supposed to love? Obviously, if you love someone, you would be naturally worried about their health, not what your partner looks like on a purely aesthetic basis. Thank God for my lovely husband." Well, Jackie, thank you so much. And he, I've got no doubt, is a very lucky man indeed. Now, the Mail on Sunday are reporting that Britain's response to Covid is set to be dramatically scaled back early next year as part of a pandemic exit strategy codenamed Ramp Down. Who doesn't love a good code name? The secret Whitehall plan is detailed in official government documents leaked to the paper. They describe how much of the government's £37 billion emergency programme for dealing with the virus will be dismantled and how the country will be prepared for living with COVID for years to come. The 160-page dossier includes a string of documents marked officially sensitive, drawn up by the senior government official tasked with winding down Britain's battle against the pandemic. In the document, experts say that COVID will remain at endemic levels for years and that mutant strains of the virus will also remain a very real risk. But crucially, the government's central planning assumption, described as the leaving soon scenario, predicts there will be no winter resurgence of the virus. So is it too soon to pop open the champagne corks? Let's speak to a man who has crunched the numbers so you don't have to. Delighted to welcome Professor David Payton, the Professor of Industrial Economics at Nottingham University Business School, who joins me now. Hi, David.
Good evening, Mark.
Do you think, based upon your analysis of the numbers, that we are through the worst of this pandemic?
Well, I think we have to be careful, of course, because we can make predictions and we know that cases can often go up and people haven't expected it at all. But I think if we go back to July, in England, we reopened pretty much everything. And at the time, there were huge predictions of terrible disaster, that we'd see massive rises in hospitalisation. And I think we've had the experience of the last 4 months where we have seen cases go quite high. They have increased to some extent, not far off where we were in January. But levels of hospitalisations and deaths have got nowhere near what we saw before. So the modellers were predicting that around about now we would have between 2,000 and 7,000 new hospital admissions every day from COVID. And actually we're facing around about 800. So we're in a very different scenario. So I think, yes, the government is perhaps recognising that COVID won't go away. It will still be a serious illness for some people, not for most people, but for some. But we do have to learn to live with the virus. So even though COVID may not be over, to some extent, I think the emergency is, and perhaps the case for emergency laws and emergency interventions and the way we've been living our lives for the past 18 months, we can now think with a little bit more confidence that we don't have to go back to those bad old days where we're always worrying about restrictions being round the corner, even if cases rise, as they may well do.
And this kind of messaging, I mean, you know that a leaked report is very often intentionally leaked in order to soften the public up for the next development. But this is clearly a good news story if it's to be believed. I mean, what might the impact on the economy be for this sort of messaging?
Yeah, I mean, the messaging is very interesting. I suspect there's a bit of a battle going on in government with different views on this, because we still see some of the more damaging frightening messages coming out. And I think when you see the messaging, you know, even a couple of weeks ago when cases were starting to fall, the government seemed very unwilling to talk about the decrease in cases. And I think that can be quite damaging for the economy. So I very much welcome if we are moving away from this constant sort of fear-mongering and ramping up the fear amongst people. It will give industry a little bit more confidence. I think there's some inconsistencies though, because we've got these leaked plans, and yet just last week the government announced that it was planning to sack thousands upon thousands of nurses and doctors in April if they decide not to get vaccinated. So we've got this weird scenario where some part of government are perhaps, as you say, maybe deliberately leaking plans to wind down the fear-mongering and go back to some sense of normality. But at the same time, we have other parts of government saying, well, we're going to be planning to sack thousands of workers, which is very much not a normal situation. So, you know, I think there is this battle going on in government. And what I hope is that we will start to see a little bit more rationality. And I'm slightly worried by some of the developments we see across Europe, in Australia. So we have Austria announcing a sort of lockdown for vaccinated people. It's very strange. We see, you know, in Ireland where they have vaccine passports and masks, and their cases are going up. And policymakers still seem to think they can do something about it, that they can sort of make vaccine passports stricter and have mask laws, and that will somehow reduce cases, when all the evidence over the past 18 months suggests that governments are not very good and don't have much power to control these surges in cases. What we can, of course, do now is, with the vaccination programme of the vulnerable, be much more reassured that the more vulnerable people are less likely to get seriously ill and die. So we can, you know, have work a little bit more normally, we would hope.
Well, David, you've won an army of fans in the course of the pandemic, myself included, for your fantastic analysis of the data. It's not opinion, it's just the numbers. You crunch them so we don't have to, and I'd recommend everybody goes to David Payton on Twitter and checks it out. Lots more to come. This is GB News. Yes, now let me tell you that we are going to speak to a remarkable man, investigative journalist Mark Williams-Thomas, the man that unearthed the Jimmy Savile story. So get your questions in now, mark at gbnews.uk.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk. Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Massive couple of hours to come. In just a few minutes, investigative journalist and author Mark Williams-Thomas will be joining me in Mark Meets. This is the man that outed Jimmy Savile. It's an incredible story. He's a remarkable guy, and he'll be joining us at 10 o'clock, so don't miss that in just 2 minutes' time. But first, the news headlines with Tamsin.
Good evening. These are the latest headlines. 3 men have been arrested under the Terrorism Act in connection with an explosion outside a hospital in Liverpool. Police, fire brigade and bomb disposal teams were called to a taxi on fire outside the Liverpool Women's Hospital near the city centre. The passenger of the car was declared dead at the scene. The driver is in hospital in a stable condition. Police say the cause is still unknown. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has tweeted, "My thoughts are with all those affected by the awful incident in Liverpool. I want to thank the emergency services for their quick response and professionalism and the police for their ongoing work on the investigation."
Continues to be a fast-paced investigation tonight. 3 men were arrested earlier this evening and there is still police activity, armed officers involved in operations in the area where those men were detained about a mile from the scene here. It has not yet been declared a terrorist incident, but the investigation is being led by the North West Counter-Terror Command.
Mark White reporting there. Members of the royal family have led the nation in honouring the country's war dead on Remembrance Sunday without the presence of the Queen. Buckingham Palace announced this morning that Her Majesty would be absent from the service at the Cenotaph in London after spraining her back. The Prince of Wales laid a wreath at the war memorial on her behalf. This year's event has seen a return to pre-pandemic numbers of participating veterans and military members. Also speaking today, Boris Johnson has hailed the COP26 agreement as game-changing, but has also expressed disappointment after last-minute changes were made to the deal. Leaders agreed to phase down, not phase out, the world's dirtiest fuel after requests by India and China. Alok Sharma has apologised to delegates after he was forced to rephrase the pledge on coal use. And the Prime Minister says there's still a long journey ahead.
My delight at this progress is tinged with disappointment. Those for whom climate change is already a matter of life and death, who can only stand by as their islands are submerged, their farmland turned to desert, their homes battered by storms, they demanded a high level of ambition for this summit. And while many of us were willing to go there, that wasn't true of everybody.
Polish military have gathered additional troops and equipment at the border with Belarus as the standoff over a migrant influx continues. The EU, which repeatedly sanctioned Belarus for human rights abuses, has accused the country of sending migrants as pawns to try to destabilise the region. Thousands of migrants are still camping on the border along a razor wire fence. Some have received emergency first aid this evening after days of cold conditions and no food. Well, you're right up to date. Now, though, it's back to Mark and Tonight.
Lots to get through in the next 2 hours. Brilliant to have your company. Keep your emails coming in. mark@gbnews.uk is the email address, which comes straight to my laptop. Lots to get through, including in Uncensored at 11. We're going stateside to hear about the shocking opioid crisis. People are addicted to these prescription medications. And unfortunately, it's a growing problem here in the UK. But we'll speak to a top doctor in America who's trying to battle this terrible cancer in society. So we'll discuss that. Plus, my amazing panel will be reacting to the big stories of the day and tomorrow's newspaper front pages. But it's time now for Mark Meets, in which I interview some of the biggest names in the world of politics, sport and entertainment, as well as people who simply have a big story to tell. Tonight, Mark Williams-Thomas is an investigative journalist and former police officer of national repute. As a child protection specialist, he's best known for exposing Jimmy Savile as a paedophile in a film called The Other Side of Jimmy Savile for ITV, a television documentary that he also presented. He's also the presenter of The Investigator, a British crime story on ITV and Netflix. This is a man who has devoted his life to pursuing justice for the victims of crime and making sure that some of the worst criminals this country has ever seen rest slightly less easy in their beds at night. The next series of his podcast, The Detective, is out at the start of December, and he'll be on Channel 5 in early December too, as a contributor to a 90-minute documentary called The Ripper Speaks about Peter Sutcliffe. I'm delighted to say Mark Williams-Thomas joins me now. Hi, Mark.
Good evening, Mark.
Mark, are you born with a kind of God-given talent for spotting bad people?
No, I mean, I'm a former detective, so my work as a police officer really got me into an area where I just became fascinated by, and I've just continued that really through my investigative world now in terms of journalism. I think what we have as journalists, as broadcasters, is a platform that reaches people and can have an impact that I couldn't do so much in the police. I mean, I can change people's lives in the police, and I did. You arrest somebody, you prosecute somebody, and you give someone some justice. But what you can do in the media is you can change policies and procedures in a far more impactful way if you get it right. Of course, if you get it wrong, you damage people's lives. And I think what I've done over the years, not just in relation to Savile, but the other programs that I've done, it's about getting justice for people. And if we can use the platform of the media and my profile to do that, then it can make a difference.
Well, on the 3rd of October 2012, almost a year after Jimmy Savile's death, you presented this documentary, The Other Side of Jimmy Savile, on ITV. It exposed Savile some serious allegations about child abuse. Now, what motivated you to make that film? Had you always suspected that Jimmy Savile was guilty of these crimes?
No, I was coming back actually from the Interpol. I'd been there to make a small film for BBC Newsnight. And on my way back, the producer said to me, Mark, have you ever heard of Jimmy Savile being a child sex offender? And I said, no. I said, he's a strange looking bloke, but I've never known any allegation against him. He said, well, there is. He is an offender. But at the moment, we can't put our report on television because he's still alive. And anyway, he dies not that long after that. And I remember him phoning me up. Maureen Jones said to me, Mark, we're now going to make this programme. Could you help us in relation to some of the information that I think you can probably get hold of being an ex-police officer? And I started to look at it, and quite quickly, the BBC Newsnight decided they weren't going to run the story. And in essence, the reason they didn't want to run the story was because they didn't see an opportunity where they could be critical of the police for failing to do an investigation. I said to them, hang on a minute, but the issue here is that Jimmy Savile is a paedophile. That's what's in question, not whether or not the police failed. That's secondary. Anyway, as a result of what we all now know, the BBC Newsnight didn't run it. And I said to them, I'm going to keep with it. I'm going to keep going. And for the following 12 months, I worked very closely with ITV lawyers and with my producer, Leslie Gardner. And between us, we managed to pull together a programme. We took it to another level compared to what BBC Newsnight had. We took it, we found new victims, we moved it away from the Duncroft Children's Home. And the result was the programme that broadcast on the 3rd of October 2012. And the impact thereafter has changed policies, it's changed procedures, it's enabled other individuals, to both high profile and everyday walk of life individuals, to be arrested. And, in the words of your opening statement, it is about saying to people, if you committed an offence, you should be worried that one day that knock on the door will come and you will be finally hauled to justice. The Savile exposures sat on the front pages for 41 consecutive days. That's how big the story is. And even now, we've got the BBC making a documentary, right or wrong in regards to that. But it still continues to make headlines, and rightly so, because what he was allowed to get away with was horrific.
What's your judgment of how the BBC handled those allegations at the time?
Appalling, absolutely appalling. I mean, I don't think you can wrap it up with anything other than that. I remember giving a talk about it not long after, and I always say that if there was a way to mismanage communications, if there was a way to not deal with managing risk, the BBC did it. They got it all completely and utterly wrong. The day of the broadcast, there was a very senior BBC executive who said to a very senior ITV executive, the ITV executive told me, they discussed this programme, and the BBC executive said, I don't think there's going to be much coming from it. I think it will probably wash over quite quickly. And the BBC exec said, I don't think that's going to happen. Of course, it didn't. It led to the Director General having to resign, and the impact thereafter, not just in relation to the fallout for the BBC, but also in relation to the hospitals, in relation to Broadmoor. This was a man who was given such a status, and by the very people who could have stopped him, didn't stop him. And that's the one big issue. I mean, I didn't contribute to any of the recent programmes around Jimmy Savile. And the reason being is that there is still one programme to be made. And that is the programme that holds these people to account, who allowed him to get away with his offending behaviour for so long. Not one single person has been held to account for allowing him to continue. Now, of course, Savile was the man that did the offending. Absolutely no doubt about that. I wouldn't put that blame on anybody else. But there are other people who turned a blind eye, who enabled him to continue his offending when they could have stopped.
How did he get away with it? Did he know information about the people who then protected him? Was it blackmail? Was he controlling, manipulative? Or was it just celebrity star power?
Both of those things. There was certainly an element, he was very, very litigious. He would get lawyers onto any allegations that were made against him and silence people. All the editors of newspapers were scared of him. He was such a powerful individual for them to take on. He didn't quite operate like Max Clifford. I mean, the Max Clifford who got prosecuted, he's now dead, died in jail. But he was directly blackmailing individuals of very high natured individuals, both in the world of sport and also in life, in order to get their story from them and then obviously put it into the public domain, but get away with it. But Savile did it in a slightly different way. I mean, the man was a complete and utter liar. I think he managed to complete just about 1 or 2 marathons. His legacy is that this is a man who completed 80, 90 marathons. No, he didn't. I mean, he was a complete and utter fraud in so many different ways, but he was allowed to get away with it because he was considered to be slightly eccentric. And as a result of that, people just turned a blind eye or just simply said, well, it's Jimmy Savile.
Can you give us a sense of the scale of his crimes? Because his crimes went back decades, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, when we were investigating him, and we took 12 months to investigate him, I did it literally as a police investigation. And during that period of time, I didn't get paid anything to do it. I just literally said, you know what, we've got to go after this guy. And I remember my mother saying to me, do you really think you should do this? Because he's so well known, he's such a status. I said, I've got to do it. I remember saying to my producer, I will either never work in television again, or this will be a success. And, we worked really hard to get it out there. And there are some of the elements of how we managed to get out there, I still haven't talked about because it was so hard. I can't express just how difficult it was to get this on air. And then having finally got it on air, I remember in 2 days afterwards, the leading officer from Operation Newtree, the Metropolitan Police, phoned me up and said, Mark, could we have a meeting? And in that meeting, which was on the 6th floor ITV towers, with the execs and with the lawyer, they said, we're doing a scoping exercise. We think there's probably about 30 victims. I said 500. 500 victims is much more of a closer figure. I said, this man has been offending for years and years and years. And of course, the outcome at the very end of the review is that there was around 500 victims.
He preyed, didn't he, on children in hospital, children who weren't even physically able to defend themselves.
He did, absolutely. I mean, he saw the opportunity. He sought out children, as all offenders do. And of course, that's been brought very much into the spotlight again with the offending of David Fuller, the man who was convicted of the bedsit murders and of the necrophilia. Specifically after Savile, there was a review that was undertaken at all the hospitals. And 2015, a report said that people should not be allowed to have access to mortuaries. And there should be a real restriction on that. Of course, what ends up happening is David Fuller was unable to gain that access because he was considered to be okay. He was a friendly guy and everyone seemed to get on with him. The problem with so many of these things is we don't learn the lessons. Politicians are very good at coming out, senior members of authorities are very good at coming out saying, we must learn the lessons. The reality is we don't. We haven't yet learned the lesson from Savile. No one's been held to account. David Fuller's back in exactly the same situation. which shouldn't have been allowed to occur, especially given the fact that a review had taken place. What needs to happen is we need to start to hold people to account. And that's what I seek to do through my programs. It's about, whenever I do a program, it's about saying, what can I do that makes a difference? What can I do that either holds people to account or provides information that gives people the opportunity to really understand what's going on? And my latest program for Channel 5 is The Ripper Speaks, and that will come out before Christmas. And that is about the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, and gaining specific access to him, enabling to find out the murders, the attacks that he's done, that he's never been brought to justice for. And we, for the first time, have got some of that new information.
Well, let's talk about Peter Sutcliffe, an awful serial killer, of course. What motivated his crimes? Is he mentally ill or just a bad man?
So I'm sure he's a psychopath. He was decided at the Central Criminal Court that he was schizophrenic. I think that was a wrong diagnosis. I think he was a clear psychopath. He was able to very clearly operate on a number of different levels. And this was a man who sought the opportunity. He got away with it for so long because of the incompetence of the police service. The misogyny that existed in the 1970s and 80s around investigating those crimes. The first 3 murders received little or no attention because they were working girls. It was only when a young girl that was murdered, who wasn't considered to be a working girl, that the media got involved and the police got involved. And the sad thing is, and it doesn't happen so much now, but certainly back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, the media were driven very much by the narrative of what the police would feed them. And we've seen that certainly in relation to Liverpool, in the Hillsborough, and it was certainly prevalent in relation to Peter Sutcliffe. The police, the misogyny of the West Yorkshire police, who were providing information to the police service to act upon, and the incompetence, of course, of their computer systems, they're failing to acknowledge. You had a senior investigating officer, George Oldfield, who was a gruff, arrogant man who basically, I was right and nobody else is right at all. And if you question my decision-making process, you'll go and stack shelves in Sainsbury's. That was his constant response that he would give to detectives when they challenged him on his view. Thankfully, we've moved forward. I think we've still got a long way to go, certainly within the police service.
Now, on the morning of the 26th of April in 1999, the TV presenter Jill Dando, of course the host of lots of BBC One television shows, including Crime Watch, was murdered outside her home. Barry George, a local man, was convicted and imprisoned for the murder, but after 8 years in prison, he was acquitted following an appeal and retrial. So who killed Jill Dando and why?
Well, sadly, we still don't know. Barry George was convicted of that offence, and on appeal, he was eventually found not guilty and deemed not to be the man responsible. The Metropolitan Police have not opened that investigation since. They have refused to accept that they need to do that. There is clearly an individual out there who killed Jill Dando who's still walking around. It's not Barry George. It was never going to be Barry George. The evidence against Barry George was so flimsical in order to get him convicted. And in fact, he was convicted basically on a gunshot particle that was so minute it couldn't even it couldn't be seen to the naked eye. I think the reality behind Jill Dando's murder is that it was organised. It was a professional hit. It was an individual who walked up to her on her front doorstep and in a matter of seconds was able to shoot her with a single bullet through the back of the neck and the head and make off and disappear. No, not to be seen by anybody. That's a professional hit. And in fact, they went to America where they have a lot more gun crime than they do here. And the American police were very clear to say that this is a professional hit. That information didn't get released properly into the public domain here. And the biggest problem is the police did a profile. They did an offender profile. They did 3 offender profiles. And the 3rd offender profile was done effectively on Barry George once Barry George was already into the mix. That's not how to do offender profiles. And then so much so that the Crown Prosecution Service afterwards said, actually, there were no offender profiles done. Well, we found there was. And actually, there's an Amazon program I've done about Jill Dando's murder. It is the biggest unsolved murder. Is it likely to be solved now? I think it's highly unlikely. The Metropolitan Police have no interest in looking for anyone else. And it is very sad because there is a professional killer out there who most probably has gone on and killed other people. I think it's clearly an individual who is capable and has done the hit walking around.
Miscarriage of justice for Barry George, who won't get those 8 years of his life back. He must have been through hell. It's a tragedy for him as well, though not on the same scale, of course. Do you think that the murder of Jill Dando could have been related to her job as one of the presenters of Crime Watch? Could it have been a hit from the criminal underworld, somebody that was being exposed by that programme?
I don't think so much to do with the Crime Watch, but I think it certainly had to do with her profile and the roles that she'd been involved in. Of course, just prior to her death, she'd been and made a charity appeal in relation to Kosovo, and there was the bombing of the Kosovo television station. So there was no doubt that her work caused her to be killed. I have no doubt about that, and I think the evidence supports that, particularly bearing in mind no one's been brought to justice for it. There was a lot of talk at the time that actually Crime Watch had nothing to do with it. I think it's unlikely that someone in relation to her has been killed for the Crime Watch. And let's be very clear, is that they are simply the face of the police. They're putting information into public domain. No police officers have been killed in relation to a case that they have done in the UK, that is. So I think it's highly unlikely you would go after the television presenter who's just simply being the front of the story. Much more likely that it's to do with her other work. And I do think the Kosovo connection and the Baltic connection is very, very strong.
Olympian Oscar Pistorius was found guilty of murdering his girlfriend at the time, Riva Steenkamp. In 2013, he shot and killed her. You've interviewed him twice, and on one occasion in the course of his trial. Tell me about that encounter.
So I made contact with Oscar Pistorius through his legal team shortly after the murder that took place, the death that took place of Riva Steenkamp, and he was being courted by every single media outlet around the world: ABC, Opera, 60 Minutes in Australia. In fact, Oprah even flew out there to try and get him to sign and do the deal. I stayed in contact with him, and actually during the trial, I went and did an interview with him for a newspaper. But then I got access to him and I made the interview, Oscar Pistorius, the interview, which was, I spent probably 3 to 4 months with him, spending a lot of time talking to him in detail about everything. And he gave me his full account. In fact, it's the only TV interview that he has ever done. And it was an incredible insight into him. I have to say, I have been and seen him since in jail. I'm still in communication with Oscar now, and I think he has not for one moment tried to shirk what he has done. He's accepted fully that he ended up killing Riva on that tragic night, but he will serve whatever sentence. He has always said that he'll serve whatever sentence that is appropriate for him. But I think it's an incredible tragedy for all parties involved, including Oscar as well, and it's very sad. And of course,
Mark, what do you think happened that fateful night? What went wrong?
Well, I think he genuinely woke up thinking that there was intruders in the house. There's evidence to support that in terms of his previous behaviour. Some months previously, he'd gone into the house and he actually heard a noise. He went downstairs, he took his gun, he went downstairs, and it was a friend who had come into his house to use his washing machine. And as a result of that, he said, because there's a text message at the time, he said, you should have done that because I nearly ended up shooting you. So there's a very clear process. That wasn't pre-planned. That was something that occurred. So it tells you that he had a fear. And I think unless you understand what it is like in South Africa with house burglaries and house break-ins, you cannot for one moment understand the fear that these people live in. I genuinely believe that on that night, he heard a noise, he woke up, and he thought that it was an intruder. And as a result of that...
Yeah. If somebody of your remarkable experience as an investigator and former police officer believes him, why did he go down?
Well, he went down because he killed her, and rightly so. He had killed her. You know, nobody has the right to take somebody else's life. I think I'm a completely against arming the police force. And in the same way, the freedom of access to guns creates that. Had he have not had a gun that night, and South Africa's laws on firearms were different and they had the same firearms laws as the UK, she would not be dead now. It's as simple as that. He took the firearm because that was his line of defense. You know, he wouldn't have had that had he been in any other.
You know, you are the original seeker of truth and justice, and I salute you for the amazing work that you've done and continue to do. And you've achieved justice for so many victims and their families. It's incredible. It's remarkable, your legacy. And as I say, that work continues. Very briefly, with the clock against us, has investigating these crimes affected your mental health at all? Do you get flashbacks? Do you get nightmares? Is it difficult not to take your work home with you?
Yeah, really difficult. I have to say, you know, probably for the last 2 years, I've realised how mental health has affected me. For 30 years, I didn't think it affected me in any way at all. I now realise it has done, and that as a result of that, you know, I try and deal with things quite differently. I've seen the worst of the worst. I've seen babies dead. I've seen children dead. I've seen the most horrific sides of abuse. I've seen the depravity that human beings can carry out on another human being, and that will affect you, and it does affect you. And what I try to do, as best I can, is turn that into the positivity of helping people. But I'm a human being in the same way as, you know, as other people are. I get upset in the same way. And actually, getting upset is a really positive thing to do because it drives you into the desire. The cases I take on are cases, by and large, that everybody else has failed on. There are positions where people just can't. I mean, my current podcast, The Detective, looks at the murder of Lee Boxall that everybody else has tried to solve. I will, in this podcast, identify who I believe the killer is. And I will give you the details of what I believe happened to Lee Boxall. I go out there to try and find justice. And I suppose in a way, it's kind of a calling. That's how I see it. I see it as a calling. I've got this platform. I'm pretty good at what I do. And I just try and see if I can help as many people as possible. But it does. And I think I'd urge anybody out there, you know, who hides behind, you know, it doesn't really affect me. It does affect you. And I think what we have to do is, you know, I live in a pretty dark world. It's a sad, dark world, but I try as best as I can to get the positivity out there, which is by helping people, because the more I can help people, the more it helps me.
Well, The Detective is a fantastic podcast, and I know Series 2 is coming, and that investigation around the murder of Lee Boxall. It's must-listen-to podcasts, I must say. It's called The Detective. Thank you, Mark Williams-Thomas, and let's catch up again in the near future. An interesting conversation, I think you'll agree. Now, if you need someone to reach out to, or if you're concerned about a child that you know, or perhaps you're a young person that's in trouble, you can contact the NSPCC. I believe that Faye is going to show us the helpline number. There it is. 0808 800 5000, 0808 800 5000. There's also Childline. Or indeed contact your GP as well. So many options. If you're in trouble, it's always important to ask for help. Now, lots to come. In our news agenda with my brilliant panel, was COP26 a cop-out? And has Boris betrayed the North over HS2? And some more incredible talking points coming up. The bank teller who made off with the equivalent of £1 million, he's unmasked after living a life of luxury for 52 years. And is rural living better than city life? Do keep the emails coming in. mark@gbnews.uk. A big hour and a half to come. I'll see you shortly.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Well, it's time now to look at which headlines are breaking and what is in tomorrow's news tonight in our news agenda. Let's have a look at the front pages. Here's the Metro, an interesting and troubling story. Health fears for the Queen. Royals' sadness as sprained back keeps Monarch 95 from cenotaph. Concern over the Queen's health has grown after she cancelled her planned appearance hours before the nation's Remembrance Sunday services. Well, I'm not one to create panic around the Queen's health. She's a remarkably fit old lady, and we wish her a speedy recovery. OK, next up, let's go to the Financial Times. Business groups add to chorus of dismay at watered-down COP deal. Fossil fuels pledge softened. China and India raise objections. Pact broadly welcomed. There we are. Fantastic. Well, with me for the course of the next hour and a half is my amazing panel. Very excited to be reunited with journalist, broadcaster and dating expert Nikki Hodgson, England cricket legend Monty Panesar, and another old friend of mine, commentator and activist Emily Hewitson. A developing story now, according to the I newspaper, the proposed Northern Powerhouse rail scheme between Manchester and Leeds will not go ahead, with money from the £39 billion scheme instead going towards existing lines. With speculation that the Birmingham to Leeds leg of HS2 is to be scrapped as well, has Boris betrayed the North? Well, I would suggest he has. This is not a good story, is it, Nikki?
Oh, my gosh, and I'm a Yorkshirewoman, so this story just absolutely infuriates me. We have waited for years for better travel infrastructure in the North. And I think what's really disappointing is the fact that when it suits Boris, he makes all these pledges and promises. And you know, everybody in the North kind of gets excited. We get our hopes up again that things are going to kind of be easier for us. That distance, by the way, between Leeds and Manchester, you know, it's really not long, but getting there takes forever. And it's really shutting down the opportunities people have to travel to work. You know, it doesn't make any sense that those regions are not connected properly. Obviously, it's not good for the environment if people are having to drive between those places all the time as well. But, you know, for me, this is kind of a pattern of behaviour that we've seen from Conservative leaders and their response to the North. David Cameron famously shut down something called Yorkshire Forward, which was a scheme to kind of invest in infrastructure when he was in power. And, you know, Boris is back in, and it's just... I'd love to know what Andy Burnham thinks of this tonight. He's probably spitting teeth about it.
It's a coup for Andy Burnham, because, I mean, that will give him a platform with which to attack the government. I mean, I'm aware it's a lot of money, but in my view, when it comes to infrastructure, it's money, no object.
Well, absolutely. And, you know, why should it be that the South is always the winner? We've talked for ages about how we need to push money up into the North. The North is the poor cousin of the South. And, you know, by actually sorting out the railways, that is one way that you can help.
Now, the government would argue that the money's going in. It's just that they've made a strategic judgment about this particular rail line. Do you accept that?
But it's been going on, like I say, this has been going for like 30 years, 40 years. We've been needing this rail line, and it's always the thing that the budget gets cut for.
What about improving other rail lines? I mean, you know, upgrading other lines to make them more efficient.
Well, maybe, but it's a bit difficult. That line just needs a lot of work on it. We definitely need a straight-through train. One of the best things that came about from travel between London and the North was having fast trains, you know, between that took like 2 hours to get there, and it's made a big difference in terms of connecting up. But we need to have that next step to improve things for everyone.
Well, I tend to agree with you. Monty, what's your view about this?
Well, I think, some people may say that, it's been since the Victorian times. We haven't seen any sort of infrastructure up north, and, potentially it'll make a lot, a huge difference. For the transport and for the people up north,
and the economy,
and the economy as well, and but then possibly the green belt area, that's one area that was considered for not protecting the wildlife, and also Boris Johnson has kind of said that it will reduce costs. And just upgrading current lines would actually be rather sort of an efficient way of working through this plan.
Well, Emily, the government are not stupid. Boris Johnson is not stupid. They must have calculated that the Red Wall will accept this decision.
Well, if you're talking about calculations, I'd love to know where they got their cost for HS2 from originally, because, it's just a spiralling cost. And it's so frustrating because that money could have gone up north. And I'm a southerner, but I can just see how much north has been neglected.
Yeah.
And it's not just by Conservative Prime Ministers, it's by Prime Ministers full stop.
Yes.
And it is really frustrating. And I really do sympathise with Northerners on this, because I just think it really is their time. They haven't had a new network since the Victorian era. Come on.
Yeah. You're a Conservative supporter. Do you think that those new Red Wall constituents who lent Boris their vote will be there next time?
Well, to be honest, I think that there is such a deep-rooted problem within the Labour Party that people warm to Boris basically because there's no better option. At the end of the day, Britain is a socially conservative country, and when you have people like Keir Starmer that was calling them bigoted because they wanted Brexit, that trust has just been completely broken, and it will take a long time for Labour to regain that trust.
Why do you think this decision has been made? Is it just money? Is it the deficit? Is it the pandemic bill that we're struggling to deal with? Is that why this has gone, do you think?
They are all factors, but you can use the money argument, but then how do you justify HS2?
Yeah, or £34 billion for test and trace, which patently didn't work. Well, cop, flop, drop and roll. If the world's on fire, then COP26 isn't putting it out. Boris Johnson hoped to claim victory at COP26, but the fact is that the objectives set out by world leaders have not been met, as evidenced by top polluters India and China agreeing only to phase down coal usage in watered-down pledges revealed yesterday. Here's the PM speaking at a press conference earlier.
Those for whom climate change is already a matter of life and death, who can only stand by as their islands are submerged, their farmland turned to desert, their homes battered by storms. They demanded a high level of ambition for this summit. And while many of us were willing to go there, that wasn't true of everybody. And sadly, that's the nature of diplomacy. We can lobby, we can cajole, we can encourage, but we cannot force sovereign nations to do what they do not wish to do.
Well, in an exclusive survey for Mark Dolan tonight, conducted by one poll, over a third of people, 36%, who support Boris Johnson's net zero pledge, said they would be in favour of all of these extreme measures. Green taxes on energy, airfares, an environmental meat tax, the banning of gas cookers and stoves, mandatory boiler replacements, compulsory retrofitting of your home with environmentally friendly insulation, and even a law forcing people to give up their cars for cleaner models. So what could have happened over the past 2 years or so to condition us into relinquishing our freedoms so readily, I wonder. What do we think about this, Monty? Do you think the public are supportive of these green measures?
Well, look, I think, that last-minute decision, by Narendra Modi, where he's kind of said, phase, not out, but phase down. And I think, China and India, they want slice of the carbon pie. And they know that it's going to cost them a lot of money, to make India and China green again with the population that they have. And, India are sort of saying that we will obviously work with this, but, You know, we will phase out under our own time and when we think it's right.
Yeah, I mean, there was some talk that India suggested they'd be carbon neutral by 2070. I mean, the issue is we're all for saving the planet, but what's the point in Britain committing economic suicide whilst others, like India and China, do nothing?
Well, because one of the reasons is that, you know, we've seen, you know, UK have been very successful. Like I've mentioned it, you know, time again, you know, with the vaccination program, and they've got to lead the way when it comes to, you know, green energy, and other countries will then follow. You know, UK do have that huge influence when they get.
But is it not more? Sorry to interrupt you, Monty, but more government borrowing, more cost to the taxpayer, you know, and also just basically punters having to buy a new car, an electric car, and buy a new boiler. I mean, people just don't have that money.
Well, there's obviously they've got grant schemes out there, you know, for new sort of, you know, hydrogen. I think, you know, boilers, which is I think over £5,000 that they'll look to give. But to get one of them, it's like £10,000. And you know, do people have five grand lying around, you know, to replace a new boiler? You know, I don't know, that's a lot of money for, you know, for a lot of people out there.
Yeah.
And you know, the biggest challenge is going to be the coal. You know, can they reduce, you know, the coal mines which are going to be, you know, new are looking to be established in China, Australia, who are the second biggest exporter of coal. You know, the Hunter Valley, that relies on thousands of jobs for, you know, for their own economy as well. So this is a huge challenge for Boris, you know, by no means. And especially, you know, 2022, when next year in Egypt, they will have, again, they'll review the process and they'll go through, you know, all the other sort of calculation, how much, you know, emissions actually are the other countries emitting. It is a small step, I think, you know, but there's a lot more still needs to be done.
Well, you think there is? I mean, I took an email earlier, Nikki, that suggested actually COP26 has been a success. Every country, every major nation signed up to it with the exception of Russia. So do you think COP26 has been rather unnecessarily criticised?
You know what, it's funny, because obviously I'm not a fan of Boris, and I'm the first person to criticise him when I think he's not pulling his weight. I mean, to be fair, he didn't need to fly home in a private jet from COP26. That was kind of undermining the message a little bit. And as Nicola Sturgeon pointed out, when there was some really important deal-breaking going on, he was nowhere to be seen. So, you know, he didn't completely act in you know, under the best judgment, in my opinion. But this is the nature of international diplomacy. You don't get everything you want, you know, the first time you go into negotiations with each other. So we've got to kind of take the good from this and build on it. That's how I see it. You know, we haven't got everything we wanted. We're sort of heading in the direction, hanging by a thread just slightly. The reality is, when it comes to China and India, you cannot expect people to rush to give up things that they've never had in the first place. So what I mean by that is, you know, in the industrialised West, we have had plenty of coal to power the things that we needed. And it's it'd be very difficult for them to say, oh, actually, we watched you industrialise with all that, and, you know, you did very well out of it, but, oh, so we're just not going to have any of that.
But if others continue to pollute and build coal-fired power stations, and we kind of basically stop using coal altogether, what's the point? What's the net result? I mean, the temperatures continue to rise. We suffer economic damage. People's, you know, quality of life actually goes, you know, down. I mean,
but the point is, it's a zero-sum game. It's a zero-sum game if we don't lead the way and set the example of doing the better thing. You know, if all nations decide, oh, we're not going to be bothered because you can't be bothered because they can't be bothered, well, everybody suffers as a result of that. You have to set a standard.
What do you think? I mean, this is a big call that Boris has made, Emily. I actually think that the green agenda is, for him, the next Brexit, and that he wants to now get the environment done. I'm not sure that his core supporters will appreciate that approach, but I think that's what he's trying to do. Yeah, no,
I think you are right, but the problem is that if you don't support these green policies, there's not really a main party you can vote for, because you know, everyone is surrounding it. But just on the issue of solving global warming in general. I think obviously it's a global issue, so we do need a global solution, but the problem is there is this sense that we're not all in it together. And that doesn't just come from just countries, for example, China and India, but also when I went to COP, one of the things that I really noticed was that for the blue zone, which is the exclusive for the rich and powerful, you only needed a lateral flow to get in. But the bit that was open to the public, it was a vaccine passport, and there was no option for the lateral flow. So I think that there is that sense of bridging the gap between, you know, it's all well and good if you're in a wealthy and powerful position dictating what us normal folks should do.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, we do all need to be together. We need to find that middle ground, because at the moment it does kind of feel like we've got these billionaires lecturing us about what we need to do and how we need to pay more.
Yes.
And I think that does create problems and friction, really.
And big countries not pulling their weight. Well, lots of emails coming in off the back of many of these topics. On HS2, Karen has said, hi Mark, I'm from the north and I'm jubilant that HS2 has been stopped from Birmingham and Leeds. It's expensive and that money would be better spent, as you've already suggested, by upgrading the existing train lines. That's from Karen with 2 kisses. I'm honoured. Thank you, Karen. I'm sure I don't deserve them. Let's have a look. Ian says, hi Mark, the first duty of any government is the security of the nation. And yet security of energy isn't one of them, apparently. The green agenda will break our economy. Saving the planet is chasing unicorns. There you go. We'll get to more of your thoughts very, very shortly. At 11, we're going to have a look at the enormous opioid crisis in the United States. Regular people addicted to pain medication. Is this problem set to grow in the UK? It's a shocking story. It's very dark stuff. You won't want to miss that one. And lots more in my media buzz. Yes, indeed. The news agenda tonight will focus next on David Beckham. Is he wrong to get into bed with the Qataris? See you in 2.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk. Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
So much to get through in the next hour and 10 minutes. I've got more front pages. Here's The Guardian. Frustration at India and China over watering down climate deal. Patients left dying in ambulances outside A&E, and 3 held under Terror Act after car explosion. A story, of course, that we brought to you earlier here on GB News, and upon which Mark White, our correspondent, reflected. Remembrance terror plot, say the Daily Telegraph. 3 held after fatal explosion. And Johnson admits error over Patterson sleaze affair. Meanwhile, Priti Patel says stop every migrant channel crossing. and she'll be saying this to the French at their next bilateral. More front pages to come. Actually, let's take a quick look at the Telegraph whilst we've got it. Here it is. And the Telegraph are saying, oh, we've actually had that, that's fine, and it's Remembrance Terror Plot 3 held. We'll bring you more on that as and when we get it. Still with me, my fabulous panel, Nikki Hodgson, Monty Panesar and Emily Hewitson. Senior officials at UNICEF are extremely concerned that David Beckham has signed a multi-million-pound deal to be the face of the Qatar World Cup. Beckham serves as a goodwill ambassador for UNICEF, and they're concerned with his relationship with the country's oppressive regime. One source told the Mail on Sunday it's the antithesis of UNICEF. It's all very sad. Meanwhile, Magda Eriksson, who plays for Chelsea, has come out and expressed her concerns over the Qatar World Cup. She told the Mail online, "I look at it as a gay woman who would never choose to go on holiday to a country like Qatar, where homosexuality is illegal." So should David Beckham really be taking the money from a regime known for human rights abuses? Well, here's the truth about this, Monty. The World Cup shouldn't be happening in Qatar in the first place.
Well, that's something for, FIFA or whatever decisions they made there. But I think with the deal with David Beckham is that he did speak to his family about this, and he did speak to the Qatari, government and the owners. They said as there needs to be rainbow flags, that needs to be, held at the stadiums throughout the World Cup, because obviously, that homosexuality is, illegal, in Qatar, and he wants to obviously promote that. But this may be an opportunity for him to actually change some of the sort of, human rights issues. There's, migrant workers, over, I think, 6,500 sort of migrant workers that actually have, unfortunately, passed away, and with the wage of only £200, pound a month.
Some of them have fallen from scaffolding whilst building these massive structures, working in midday heat, 40 degrees centigrade under grueling conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the kind of stuff maybe David Beckham could, raise some of these issues and say, well, OK, if I want to, be part of, be an ambassador for Qatar, then, he could lead that way and voice these concerns.
Do you think Qatar can change their culture?
Well, we've seen it with Saudi Arabia and Qatar. They're obviously, sports washing, using that to clean up their image and also, use the World Cup to, brand their country in a positive way. And you've seen that with Saudi Arabia and Qatar doing that. But like you look at the sports stars in our country, the likes of Marcus Rashford, who did amazing things with the Felix Project. Raheem Sterling is going to develop his own own foundation and charity. That this is where I think the sports stars, what we see is probably we are expecting from David Beckham. So he really needs to sort of take some of this ownership and say, right, what are the real issues, and let me, try and tackle them.
What do you think about this, Emily?
I have a very strong opinion on this. I think it is shameful that the World Cup is being held in Qatar. And, there might be rainbow flags, but at the end of the day, you can be sentenced to death for being homosexual in Qatar. So they can shove their rainbow flags where the sun don't shine, as far as I'm concerned. But I just want to raise the point as well that I think there's a big hypocrisy amongst footballers. They're talking a lot, for example, about Black Lives Matter. But when it comes to things like this, not a peep. And I just want to read out this powerful sentence from a Qatar migrant worker. He said, "They take the knee, we live on our knees." I think that says everything you need to know.
Wow, that's a devastating line. Nikki, what do you think?
Well, look, this is all about money. And doesn't David Beckham have enough of it? That's all I'm thinking, 150 million to do this. I just wonder who's advising him, because, when he looks back at his career in years to come, is this the point that he'll think, that was a bit of a misstep there? I mean, let's remember that this man is very, very conscious of his brand. In 2013, there were all those letters leaked, emails leaked with him kind of saying, how am I going to get a knighthood? He can be quite dogged about how he thinks he's perceived.
Obsessed with his legacy.
And maybe obsessed with his legacy, but is he now doing this because he thinks, I'm not going to get the knighthood, so I might as well just take the cash?
However, what about Monty's idea that he can be a role model and he can, essentially precipitate change?
Well, maybe he could, but it's a bit difficult if you're taking money in one hand and then, advocating change in the other. And, as for kind of like flying rainbow flags, that's just pink washing,
Powerful stuff. Well, I'd love to know your thoughts, Mark, at gbnews.uk. Do you think that David Beckham shouldn't be taking this money? Do you think less of him for doing so? Now, a bank teller who made off with the equivalent of £1.2 million in cash in 1969 has finally been caught. But he died before he could face justice. Theodore Joe Conrad walked into his job at Cleveland's Society National Bank in the US state of Ohio and walked out that evening with, at the time, $215,000. He was found in Boston, Massachusetts, 52 years later, having lived a full life with his wife and children. Theodore, who was obsessed with the Thomas Crown affair, told his family the story on his deathbed before he succumbed to cancer. But when the police tracked him down, it was too late. Of course, this man was a criminal and a thief, but getting away with a bank robbery for 52 years, you've got to respect that, haven't you? Seriously, Monty.
Well, I think it's one of the most, unsolved cases in America. And actually where he lived in Boston was close to the location of this movie that he was completely obsessed with. So, he must have, had some guardian angel protecting him all these years.
Well, I don't want to legitimise his terrible crime. And there is no crime that isn't, doesn't involve a victim of some sort or whatever, including those bank tellers that were, essentially having to hand over all that cash at the time. I'm sure they were very fearful for their lives, Nikki. But it's remarkable that he didn't get caught. And it's remarkable how often criminals do. There's that amazing story of a woman that was head of the HR department of a really large company. And she had an amazing scheme, which is she took a penny out of everyone's payslip every month. And because there were so many people working for the organisation, it amounted to a lot of money. And she got away with it for 3 years. And it was only when people noticed that she was driving a flashy car that they raised the flag, the red flag. But there's something about most criminals. They're not satisfied with one crime. They've got to go back for more.
Oh, it depends on the criminal. I mean, I think in this case, Conrad had, he'd been very deliberate about plotting this. He'd actually told people how easy it would be to rob the bank.
Yeah.
Which, surely the first rule is keep it secret.
Yeah.
But, I suppose if you pinch enough money in one go, you never have to do something else. But I agree, there's probably something quite compulsive about getting away with it.
Yeah.
If you've got away with that, do you think, well, what can I do next time?
Yeah, I'm always amazed. I mean, these criminals are terrible people, Emily, but I'm amazed that they don't get one heist and then just go, that's it, we've got £1 million. Keep it, well, maybe not in the bank, perhaps under the mattress, and then just have a normal life. But very rarely do they.
No, I know. Apparently it's not enough. There's 7 yachts. Apparently they still need more.
Yeah.
But the one thing amazing about this story is that he didn't tell his family, and it was only when he was dying on his deathbed that he finally let them know. But obviously the FBI didn't unmask him until 6 months after. Couldn't the family just, given them a nudge since he was dead anyway?
And will they have to give the money back? That's the other question. Brilliant stuff. Well, we've got so much to get through. I'm really excited about the last hour of the show. We've got lots more talking points with my panel for the news agenda, including the member of the Japanese royal family who has left the palace. She's left the royal family altogether and she's living in a one-bedroom flat, which is the inspiration for tonight's Great British Game Show. Really looking forward to that one. We'll also have a look at the Tesco ad pushing vaccine passports. But after this, the opioid crisis in America, is it coming to Britain? See you shortly.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk. Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
We've saved our best till last, a massive final hour of the show. Before midnight, we're going to play another Great British Game Show. That's right, it's a game based around a big story of the day, and I want you to play along at home as well as our panel taking part. Also, in Uncensored, we're going to speak to an American doctor called Dr. Paul Christo on how the pandemic has exacerbated the devastating opioid crisis. Regular Americans hooked on painkillers, it's destroying America's great cities. But the question is the opioid crisis coming here to the UK? It's very, very dark stuff. You won't want to miss that. The Good Doctor live from the United States in the next couple of minutes. Plus, my panel will continue to react to tomorrow's front pages, and we've got some massive talking points along the way. But first up, here are the headlines with Tamsin.
Good evening. These are the latest headlines. 3 men have been arrested under the Terrorism Act in connection with an explosion outside a hospital in Liverpool. Police, fire brigade and bomb disposal teams were called to a taxi on fire outside the Liverpool Women's Hospital near the city centre. The passenger of the car was declared dead at the scene. The driver is in hospital in a stable condition. Police say the cause is still unknown. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has tweeted, "My thoughts are with all those affected by the awful incident in Liverpool. I want to thank the emergency services for their quick response and professionalism, and the police for their ongoing work on the investigation." Well, our Home Affairs and Security editor Mark White has this update.
Continues to be a fast-paced investigation tonight. 3 men were arrested earlier this evening, and there is still police activity, armed officers involved in operations in the area where those men were detained, about a mile from the scene here. It has not yet been declared a terrorist incident, but the investigation is being led by the North West Counter-Terror Command.
Mark White reporting there. Members of the royal family have led the nation in honouring the country's war dead on Remembrance Sunday without the presence of the Queen. Buckingham Palace announced this morning that Her Majesty would be absent from the service at the Cenotaph in London after spraining her back. The Prince of Wales laid a wreath at the War Memorial on behalf of the Queen. This year's event has seen a return to pre-pandemic numbers of participating veterans and military members. Also speaking today, Boris Johnson has hailed the COP26 agreement as game-changing, but has also expressed disappointment after last-minute changes were made to the deal. Leaders agreed to phase down, not phase out, the world's dirtiest fuel after requests by India and China. Alok Sharma has apologised to delegates after he was forced to rephrase a pledge on coal use. And the Prime Minister says there's still a long journey ahead.
My delight at this progress is tinged with disappointment. Those for whom climate change is already a matter of life and death, who can only stand by as their islands are submerged, their farmland turned to desert, their homes battered by storms, they demanded a high level of ambition for this summit. And while many of us were willing to go there, that wasn't true of everybody.
Polish military have gathered additional troops and equipment at the border with Belarus as the standoff over a migrant influx continues. The EU, which repeatedly sanctioned Belarus for human rights abuses, has accused the country of sending migrants as pawns to try to destabilise the region. Thousands of migrants are still camping on the border along a razor-wire fence. Some have received emergency first aid this evening after days of cold conditions and no food. Well, you're right up to date now, though. It's back to Mark.
It's 4 minutes past 11, uncensored in a moment. But at this time in the show every evening, we take a look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages. Where shall we start? Let's go to the Mail, shall we? Here's the Mail newspaper. It is a shocking headline and a shocking photograph. Poppy Day bomb rocks maternity hospital. 3 men were under arrest last night after a suspected car bomb blast at a maternity hospital. The explosion, which killed 1 man and wounded a second, came just seconds before the 2-minute silence for Remembrance Sunday. Witnesses spoke of a huge bang as a taxi exploded into a fireball after pulling up outside Liverpool Women's Hospital. Shocking story. Next up, we've got the I newspaper. Rail plans scaled down in blow for levelling up. Government to scrap plans for a new high-speed link between Leeds and Manchester, along with abandoning HS2 extension from Birmingham. And actually, I've had an email from Andrew about this. Mark, this shows how out of touch MPs are with the public. This will be needed when motoring becomes out of reach to most people, when this shower take all of our cars off us in a few years' time. Andy, thank you so much for that. Next up, the Times newspaper. Covid booster shots for the under 50s to prevent winter wave. And 3 held by terror police after fatal blast. And Queen misses service with back sprain. The Express, Palace calms fears over Queen's health as royals lead tributes to the fallen. Terror probe into Poppy Day blast. Hero cabbie locks suspect in car. Deadly explosion outside hospital. Fascinating stuff. Some really, really awful headlines to bring you. Well, we'll get more on that story as it emerges, of course, here on GB News in the course of today's show and tomorrow across all of our live output. It's time now for this. It's time for Uncensored, in which we speak to top commentators who can speak freely and fairly without being edited, censored, interrupted or cancelled. Well, tonight, America is in the grip of an opioid crisis. Its great towns and cities are blighted by images of people strung out on powerful painkillers and heroin and other medications to which they are addicted. So just how has this crisis happened? And could addiction to prescription medications be a growing problem here in the UK? To discuss this, let's head to the United States and let's speak to Dr. Paul Christo, Associate Professor at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, who has been working on the front line of this devastating opioid crisis, which has seen a spike in overdose deaths in all 50 states of America in 2020. Dr. Christo, welcome to GB News.
Thank you very much for having me.
Could you tell us what an opioid drug is?
Well, an opioid drug, for example, would be something like oxycodone, hydrocodone, morphine. I mean, those are sort of commonly understood opioids. We actually manufacture these ourselves. They're called endogenous opioids. Endorphins would be the name of those. Either way, they're used to reduce pain, and they bind to certain receptors in the body, specifically, brain and spinal cord, to reduce pain.
And they're very effective. So how do people get addicted to them? Does it begin as a prescription for some kind of ailment?
Well, that was the case that we believe to have occurred probably in the 1990s. So there were a lot of opioids that were being prescribed to patients in pain who probably didn't need them. I think it was done not out of malice, but out of a real interest in reducing pain. Because remember, we have not only an opioid crisis in this country, but we really have a pain crisis alone. So it started, I think, with prescription opioids, transitioned to dying from the use of an opioid called fentanyl, synthetic fentanyl.
Yes. So tell us about the pharmaceutical industry. Are they partly responsible for this crisis? Because clearly they've been making money from it.
That's right. Right. They have been making money from it. I think, yes, probably partly responsible. One pharmaceutical company in particular, Purdue Pharma, has admitted a couple of times 2007, and recently, I think even last year, as to their culpability with respect to marketing practices related to OxyContin. That's the opioid that they manufactured. So yes, I think to a certain extent, they are responsible for it.
Yes, and the idea of these opioids is that if, God forbid, Dr. Christo, you've been in a car accident and you're in unbearable pain, then that's a fantastic solution for 2 or 3 weeks. They're not supposed to be a long-term option, are they? So how long does it take to actually get hooked on them?
Well, let me backtrack for 1 second. You're right. They're excellent for acute pain, but you know what? They actually are useful for chronic pain too. And many of us who use opioids for chronic pain, for non-cancer pain and for cancer pain, basically, have realized this. It's just that what's happened is that you've had a lot of family practitioners, other physicians, and other healthcare practitioners that have used opioids as a frontline agent before using other therapies. I think that's what we've seen, unfortunately, happen in the United States.
Yeah, so they've been handing them out like sweets, basically.
Probably to a certain extent. I mean, that's changed now because what we're seeing.
Now, we've lost Dr. Christo. We'll try to re-establish the line. I've had a fascinating email from a British pharmacist. If you watch this show regularly, you'll know that I've got the highest regard for our amazing pharmacists in this country. They've got so much knowledge, so much expertise and access to plenty of very good over-the-counter medication. I think that if we're going to save the NHS, one thing we should do is boost the role of pharmacists. Well, I've had this from Marjorie, and Marjorie has said, Mark, as a retired pharmacist, I don't know much about the illegal use of prescription drugs, but I know plenty about prescribed drugs. I've been retired for about 5 years, but even when I was working, there were definite signs of over-prescribing of very strong analgesics, especially controlled drugs like morphine, pethidine, heroin, and the aforementioned fentanyl. Fentanyl was hailed initially as an excellent analgesic, which it is, but it's highly addictive, as is, is the drug that they're all having problems with in America. And the doctor mentioned that fentanyl seems to be a big, big problem. In this country, I tend to blame the doctors who are the original prescribers. Many prescribers seem to issue repeat prescriptions at the drop of a hat. In answer to your question, the crisis is here. Well, I'll raise that with the doctor, who I'm delighted to say is back with us. Dr. Christo, what's the timeline of addiction? How long can you get away with taking something like fentanyl before you become hooked?
That when we're talking about fentanyl, we're talking about the use of fentanyl illegally, not for medical purposes. I think that's important to clarify. Now, with respect to addiction, addiction takes hold when you take a drug with rewarding properties, like fentanyl, could be alcohol, and you administer it to a vulnerable person at a vulnerable time in life. And of course, we've seen the throes of addiction occur even more during COVID-19 and the stresses related to that.
Now, Dr. Christo, clearly some people have been prescribed this medication, they've stayed on it too long, and now they're hooked. Are there others that are taking these medications either through their doctor or illegally, recreationally? How much of this is purely recreational?
A lot of it's recreational. So I think the deaths that are associated with opioids today in the United States, and it's specifically fentanyl, are related to recreational use. What we've also seen, unfortunately, is a combination of drugs like fentanyl along with psychostimulants. These are drugs like methamphetamine and cocaine. So it's the combination of these two illegal drugs that we're seeing lead to all these deaths.
And the big problem, Doctor, from what I've read, is that the authorities are now clamping down on the over-prescribing of opioid painkillers. But what's happening is people can't get the drug to which they're addicted legally, so they go to a dealer and they try something else like heroin or like fentanyl.
Some of that certainly has happened, no question about it. And unfortunately, what's happened over the last several years is that those patients now who are receiving opioids for chronic pain legitimately have been cut off of those supplies. And that's led to extreme hardship in terms of quality of life. And you're right, that has led some to the illegal market to buy opioids illegally, and some have died as a result of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, the figures are shocking, aren't they? According to a recent study, there were almost 700,000 drug overdoses between 1999 and 2016. This is an epidemic.
It is an epidemic. Now, we've had about over 90,000 deaths related to substances in 2020, and about half of those or so are probably linked to synthetic fentanyl, so the illegal use of fentanyl.
So who's making this fentanyl?
Well, we think that there are drug dealers in the United States getting supplies from perhaps Mexico and China. And I think one of the strategies has been to cut down on those people who are selling drugs illegally. I mean, law enforcement really needs to get involved here so we can stop the illegal selling of these drugs that is certainly harming the public health.
And how are people taking things like fentanyl? Is it intravenous? Is it in pill form? How do they abuse this drug?
Usually intravenously is what they're doing.
Right.
Yes.
And possibly more than once a day, or what's the pattern of use?
Yeah, several times a day. And remember, when you look at fentanyl, fentanyl is about 80 to 100 times more potent than morphine and can easily lead to death. And that's what we're seeing, more and more deaths.
That if you're addicted to something like fentanyl or these other opioids, you can't have a normal life. I mean, can you work? Can you raise a family?
No, typically you can't. I mean, when you're in the throes of addiction to any substance of abuse, right? It could be alcohol, could be fentanyl, could be cocaine. The hallmark is loss of control over use despite harmful consequences. It's very difficult to maintain a normal life.
You've done amazing work. You're the associate professor at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, the Johns Hopkins. And you've been working on the front line of this crisis. So how can you help people? How do we get people off these drugs?
Sure. I think that what needs to be done is we need to get more people into treatment. So we have a scarcity of addiction medicine services, addiction treatment services in the United States. Those that we do have, unfortunately, are quite expensive. So I think we need greater access to addiction treatment centers. Also, we need greater use of what are called medication-assisted treatments. These are drugs like methadone that you probably heard about, Suboxone, buprenorphine. These are critical in terms of maintaining sobriety and recovery.
Well, yes, and I think you're a great proponent in online treatment as well, aren't you? And obviously that's been enforced upon every country in the world as a result of the pandemic. But you think that's important too, that people can actually connect online to get help?
Very important, and that's been a positive effect of the pandemic, frankly. That is an increase in telemedicine services, telemental health services as well. So it links people to, psychiatrists, psychologists, other types of healthcare, mental health care professionals.
Now, if you've been to the doctor, a few months ago, a few years ago for back pain or earache or a tooth problem, and you've been prescribed an opioid painkiller and found yourself hooked, I mean, that's not a stereotypical drug user, is it? So there must be thousands of Americans, and I fear many people here in the UK too, who don't look like your typical drug addicts, but do have a problem. Housewives, professionals, family people.
Yes, that certainly can occur. I mean, it's not only patients in pain that, can develop the disease of addiction. It can be anybody. And certainly during the pandemic, we saw a lot of economic hardships and we saw a lot of emotional hardships. And I think that led many people who never used substances of abuse before to start using them in order to cope with, the stresses related to the pandemic.
I don't think the problems that you have in the States are on the same scale here in the UK, but what would your advice be to policymakers and medics here in the UK to ensure that this problem doesn't grow in Britain?
Well, I would say that, what's also important here is the use of Narcan, also known as naloxone. It's the opioid reversal agent. Make sure that frontline providers have access to it and can distribute it. That would mean emergency medical technicians, certainly, for example, firefighters. That's key. Even pharmacies, certainly in the United States, carry it, and it can be dispensed without a prescription. No question about it, it saves lives, especially for those who are overdosing on an opioid.
Dr. Christo, it's been a privilege to have you on the show. Thank you so much for enlightening us as regards this very, very serious problem of opioid addiction. My thanks there to the very venerable Dr. Christo from Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, Dr. Paul Christo, the Associate Professor there. Fascinating stuff. Well, next up, before midnight, the Great British Game Show. That's right, we're going to play a game based around a big news story of the day. Noble or nobody? Can you tell the difference between obscure royals and regular commoners? Plus, coming up in the news agenda, should we ditch the city in favour of country living? That's what the model Kate Moss has done. So what do you think, town versus country? Who gets your votes? And also, how long should you hold a grudge against your ex? Lots to get through. See you shortly.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Still with me, my amazing panel, Nikki Hodgson, Monty Panesar and Emily Hewitson. Now, it's that time of year where the Christmas adverts are being released in their droves. Companies are fighting it out to produce the most charming, compassionate corporate Christmas message, to be the one who tugs the hardest at the consumer's heartstrings. Supermarket chain Tesco, however, look to have missed the memo. Their advert released yesterday is more propaganda than promo, with Santa showing off his vaccine passport to border control so he can avoid quarantine. Take a look.
Breaking news. Santa could be quarantined.
Next.
Strange stuff. I've got to say I was a bit horrified when I saw that. Emily, what's your reaction to Tesco essentially brainwashing the public into being vaccinated?
Come on. Look, I do actually have a lot of concerns about Covid passports. I think, we should resist it as much as possible. I think there's something very, very sinister about it. But come on, it's blooming Santa. It's all... my feeling with this advert is they're just you know, they're almost mocking the whole thing. You know, it's just meant to be light-hearted. Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, I think Tesco has done what they set out to achieve. Everyone's talking about it.
But it's not, I mean, Tesco's an amazing business. I'm a big fan of that supermarket, but it's not their job to get people vaccinated.
But do you think they want COVID passes?
It irritates me when you've got episodes of EastEnders when the actors are talking about the vaccine as well. It's like, look, I'm supportive of the vaccine, I'm double jabbed, but don't put it in adverts and don't put it in soap operas. Don't write songs about it. Don't have stand-up comedy routines about it. Let the government have their messaging, and can we just be free from all of this brainwashing outside of that?
But what is brainwashing about that? Is anyone going to say, Santa's got one?
Oh, the message is, oh, God, I better go and get jabbed. Father Christmas has been jabbed.
I think that's long gone. You know, at the end of the day, majority of people
Well, the
are
message is, if you've been vaccinated, then you'll get where you need to go. You know, it is a message in its own right.
Yeah, and I do kind of get that, but at the end of the day, I don't think Tesco are really looking to bring in COVID passports. I don't think that would be very good for, you know, their customer.
Well, someone's used it on one of their adverts.
It's just light-hearted. Come on, give over, Mark. They probably did it when they thought COVID passports would actually be a thing, and then they were like, oh, we've had a bit of a...
Am I being a bit of a Scrooge here?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I've got to agree with Emily. I think they're just kind of mocking it a bit, aren't they? Because it's an obvious visual symbol. We know what that means. So it's kind of an in-joke for everyone who's watching this Christmas, being like, oh, phew, we don't have to worry about that. You know, I just think it's a joke.
Maybe I've had a sense of humour failure. What do you think? Am I reading too much into it, Monty?
Yeah, I think you are. I think, look, over 90% of people, you know, there's a poll coming out, they say they're looking forward to Christmas. And, you know, no one's thinking about these vaccination passport or anything. They want this Christmas to be the, you know, best ever that they've had. And that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about festive mood, and let's be upbeat about Christmas.
There you go. I stand corrected. It's a gag. I've been outnumbered. Do you agree? Am I reading too much into it? Mark at gbnews.uk. Now, the Polish Prime Minister is seeking concrete steps to solve the migrant crisis on the EU border. The Polish PM has said Poland, Lithuania and Latvia may ask NATO for help if the crisis continues. The Belarusian president has been accused of encouraging thousands of migrants to travel to the country in hope of crossing into the EU. Now, just a quick warning that the following pictures contain flashing images. But film footage released by Poland's border force revealed how its troops were blinded by lasers and strobe lights as they tried to shore up the frontier. Hours earlier, Belarus forces had destroyed part of the 120 miles of barbed wire fencing that separates the East European states. Migrants were also armed with tear gas by the Belarus military to attack Polish forces once they got across the border. Pretty tough story, and we'll keep you updated on that as the story develops. Now, the big city lights or country pubs and scrumping? What's better? Well, I don't know what scrumping is, so you have to help me out with that one. But former party girl Kate Moss has chosen the latter, according to the Mail, relocating from her £10 million London mansion to her Cotswolds getaway in what is seen to be a permanent move. I'm told by my director, Ross, that scrumping is the stealing of apples, something I hope he's never done. So, is it natural progression as we get older? Do we yearn for the quiet of the country? And is country life necessarily more wholesome? Nikki, you a country bumpkin?
Well, I'm trying to be. I've just moved out of the centre of town to the very edge of town because I've been craving green, and I've got a little sausage dog now, and, you know, he needs more.
He needs
greenery,
his exercise.
and yes. And now I'm there, I sort of think, well, what took me so long? I can't really believe that I was as attached to city life as I was. It was a necessary evil for me. I work in London, I need to be near to things. Yeah. But, you know, as time goes on, I'm already thinking about the next step out and the next step out.
Even further into the country.
Oh, yes, I can definitely see that on the horizon. Yeah. I'm actually thinking at 47, what took Kate Moss so long? Maybe she's having a wonderful time here.
You know, the argument, apparently, according to this story in the Mail, is that she wants to be as clean living as possible, because we know that she's a legendary model. She's also, you know, in her time, partied quite hard. And what they're speculating about in this article is that she's moved to the country so she can clean up her act a little bit. Will that help?
Well,
is the country the right place for that?
I was going to say, if you move to Oxfordshire, not, because it's famous for having its own little party scene in the Cotswolds.
Yeah. So. Microbreweries, pubs, I mean...
all-night parties in secret houses down long drive.
And no one finds out.
And nobody finds out, so actually it's not necessarily
and also,
the answer.
What about life in the country? I mean, is it a cliche that it's more relaxing, that it's less stressful?
Well, it depends what you do. If you're running a farm or something, that's obviously going to be stressful, isn't
Yeah.
it? If you don't feel, I think with everything, you've got to feel connected to other people. So I think, you know, what we've seen during the pandemic is so many people making that jump to move out. But if you're not tapped into a network, and if you don't build a network for yourself, you'll start to feel very, you know, itchy, very isolated, and then that's not a recipe for happiness either.
Well, some people love to go to the country for a week or 2 weeks, Monty, an Airbnb, or they rent a cottage. But living there is another story, isn't it?
Yeah, look, it depends on people's lifestyles. You know, like myself, I love the greenery. You know, I've been on a cricket field most of my life, and you know, I love running, you know, and doing my long distance running. So yeah, I absolutely, you know, it depends on your lifestyle. You know, if you're a countryside to an urban are two different lifestyles all put together, and you know, you got to like it's a more an outdoor spacey kind of thing. You got to have sort of habits of like, you know, enjoying hiking, enjoying the sort of morning runs, as we call, across the lovely green pastures. You know, that's if you enjoy that, then definitely, you know, I'm sure the Queen of London is probably one of the reasons why she's moved to the Cotswold for that.
Yeah, possibly quite wise. So do you live in a rural area, or are you still more or less in the city?
No, I live in London myself, and you know, I've got quite a bit of greenery around me where I live. But I do see a difference because obviously, you know, my family, you know, do live in Bedfordshire, and then when I see the slightly more, you know, there is a difference in air.
I love Bedfordshire.
And, yes.
Beautiful. It's an absolutely gorgeous county. Well, I mean, I wonder about this, Emily, because when I've spent time in the country, I have a fantastic time. I really, really enjoy it. But I do find that you're very reliant on the car. What's counterintuitive about our great cities is that you don't need a car at all, which brings its own freedom.
Well, I am the perfect person to answer this question because I'm a student. I go to uni in London, but my family home is in the countryside.
Brilliant.
Well, kind of, but it means I get the best of both worlds. So if anyone's in a financial position to do both, I say do it.
If you had to choose, I mean, if you could work in either the country or the city, what would your choice be?
I've got to work in the city, but my plan is, you know, become a millionaire and then just do both.
Just
Easy,
right?
right?
Give
Easy.
it 6 months. She's on her way. The drinks are on Emily. Now, it takes a while for a broken heart to heal, let me tell you. But Taylor Swift may be pushing things to the extreme. There she is. The US singer has released a new 10-minute version of her fan favourite 2012 song, All Too Well, which reportedly chronicles her breakup from Donnie Darko actor Jake Gyllenhaal. So Taylor, who is re-recording all of her old material after her masters were controversially sold to Justin Bieber's manager Scooter Braun in 2019. So, she also, are you a broadcaster and journalist, but you are a dating expert as well?
And I have many a grudge against an ex. No, that's not true. I have written books about exes, so, you know. I actually think, with that in mind, this is far less to do with holding a grudge and far more to do with using what happens to you creatively as you go forward. And I think if you're a writer of any variety, whether that's a songwriter or, you know, a writer of books, then if somebody has spurned you, they should watch out because eventually they may turn up in the pages of
Yeah, so it's all materials.
It's
if you've,
all
you've
material.
had a miserable time, at least make some money out of it.
Exactly. Or, you know, write something down that's going to resonate with other people, make them feel better.
But don't you think he's done his time? 11 years.
Well, I think he should be flattered that after 11 years she still cares about it.
Yeah, that's right. But, I mean, do you know of people who do hold a grudge for that long against an ex?
Well, of course. And, you know, if somebody's done something really terrible to you, well, maybe you don't ever get over it.
And sometimes it's not that it was so terrible, it's that you were at a stage in your life, perhaps very young, when you were very emotionally fragile. I think, for example, you always remember the first time your heart was broken.
Yeah, you remember the first time you get cheated on, you don't normally forgive that.
Yeah.
Maybe years later you can say, oh, we were young and foolish and all the rest of it. But
Yeah.
that pull that somebody betrayed you doesn't leave you.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. It's okay to, you know, you can move on with your life and still have memories where you think, that person shouldn't have done that. And that's good because that's about having a moral standard for yourself, having a standard where you know how you should be treated and you don't want to be treated like that again in the future.
Is it okay to still love your ex? Or is that unhealthy?
I think that's unhealthy. Yeah. Unrequited love for an ex is probably the most damning kind.
Is that because it
unrequited.
precludes future
Well,
relationships?
of course, and also people tend to do it because it's a way of blocking out the future. It stops them from moving on. You know, it's very easy to idealise someone in the past or what something was. without, what you need to do is focus on the future, focus how you're going to move on from that. Well, who's the next brilliant person that's going to come along? You have to do that.
So what would you say to anyone watching that is still besotted with Sandra from Accounts?
Go to therapy. Go to therapy and sort it out.
Can I just tell you, there is a Sandra from Accounts here at GBNews.
Yeah.
She's amazing, and I love her. No, I don't.
Well, no, and the other thing is that people tend to cling on to things because they, often it's to do with our families. We learn how to love other people from how we love in our family units. So if there's something that you're kind of clinging onto, it's probably tied to something that was in your childhood.
So what's the best way to wean yourself off someone? I mean, if you have fallen head over heels in love with someone, the relationship's ended, perhaps they've done the dirty on you. What is the best way to move on? What are the steps you can take?
Well, you have to cut contact, first of all. Don't think you can be friends after if you still kind of have feelings for someone. So cut contact, get rid of all the social media.
All right.
Don't be reminded of them. If you've got particular friends in common that are talking about each other, get rid of them as well, or put them on the back burner.
All right.
And then move on with your life.
So you've got to do a real Meghan Markle. You've got to ghost a lot of people, really.
Well, it's not, I wouldn't call it a ghosting. I'd call it a cleansing.
Right. Oh, I like that. I think I've been cleansed plenty of times in my life. Emily, do you hold a candle for anyone in your past?
Look, I'm terrible.
Now's a good time to say, 'cause you're on national TV.
I don't think my boyfriend watching at home would be too happy if I announced that I do. But I'm terrible at holding grudges. Honestly, I think a boy could get with my sister whilst I'm in a relationship with them. 3 days later, I'll be like, look, do you want to be friends? I just don't like having bad blood.
I really don't think you should give your boyfriend these ideas.
Gosh, Dan, I'm watching
It's
you.
going to be like the Jeremy Kyle show round at your house.
Well, yeah, all sorts.
So you're very forgiving, essentially.
But I'm too forgiving. Like,
I think it's
definitely.
good. Isn't that a good quality?
Well, OK, so you can forgive but not forget. So I think what's good to do is be like, OK, I'm not going to carry this anymore because it's poisoning me. But you don't have to then be best mates with them. You can just park them. It's good to have distance from people that hurt you.
And I think, I'm no expert, but just from life experience, I think the trick is that you just need to move on. That what you do is you accept. It's like, OK, this person that I'm besotted with is not into me. That is a really painful truth, but I'll just accept it because I've got to get on with my life. And I think that's the point of anything that happens in your life. If you lose your job or your circumstances change in any way, yes, it's painful, but you accept it, and that's how you move on.
Go where you're wanted. That's what I always say, whether it's work, whether it's friends, whether it's love.
That's
Go to the things that want you. That is where you will find satisfaction.
Yeah.
It's like therapy. I'm loving this.
This is brilliant. You should charge for this.
Basically a therapy
Well,
session
you
now.
do charge for this. Actually, how do people get your services?
Well, they can just follow me on social media.
Can I just rephrase that briefly? People might just be tuning in. They're like, what kind of show is this?
No, that's all right.
It's a family show, folks.
You can look me up on my website or follow me on social media.
Hodgson. You've got a very fabulously spelt name. N-I-C-H-I.
Oh, gosh, Mark, do you know what?
What's the story there?
So when I was a teenager, precocious teenager, I decided that my name wasn't memorable enough as Nikki, so I just switched it round. And it's too late now. I've published under it, and I come on telly as it,
I think it's very
I'm stuck
glamorous,
with it.
and it's obviously served you well. Monty, what about you? Tell us about the loves of your life.
Yeah, look.
Apart from that red ball.
Well, look, I'm at my most obviously relaxed state when you put a cricket ball in my hand. But I think with relationships, they can be sometimes quite deep and quite meaningful, spiritually, emotionally, the mental connection that you have. And, for some people, it's very difficult, to let go. And the best description I tend to give, when you say you forgive someone in the past, and also send them love. Send them love, send them, pray for them as well. These are very good things to do because it helps you to move on with your life. And it's like, if you've got a fist and you just got a clenched fist and you just walk around with that could be extremely tiring. You've got to let go of it. We're having a therapy session, aren't we?
So, it's inspirational.
Yeah.
I've got to say, I think I'm about to burst into tears. I need a hug. Well, look, what are your stories about your exes? Are you still in touch with them? How do you move on from an ex? Tell us your stories. Mark at gbnews.uk. Coming up, it's the part of the show that we look forward to the most. It's the Great British Game Show. And tonight, it's a game that we want our panels to play, and I want you to join in along with At Home. Can you tell the obscure royal from the commoner? That's going to be our game next. Can't wait for that. It's Noble or Nobody. That's the name of the game. Plus, lots more in our news agenda and your emails. See you in 2.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Just loading these emails. We talked about the Tesco advert earlier. It features Father Christmas showing his Kovid certification. My brilliant panel just think that I've had a sense of humour bypass and that it was a joke about the pandemic, light relief. However, let's have a look at Michael, who says, Mark, the Tesco advert is straight from the little red book of the Behavioural Insights team. They are conditioning the public to accept the evil vaccine passport as a normal way of life. You're quite right to point it out. Jake says, Mark, I work at Tesco, although I'm a pleb in terms of status and come nowhere near the marketing team. You're no pleb in my book, Jake. But Jake continues, I loved the advert, but that scene really put a dampener on it. Completely out of context and trying to politicise Christmas, which is supposed to be magic. No need to include such a divisive issue in what should be a light-hearted production. Take those few seconds out and it's a great advert. Sorry, panel, I agree with Mark. Well, it is all about opinions, of course. Rona, the same. Mark, you're not being a party pooper. Here in Wales, we booked to take our granddaughter to Panto in December to be told, as from today, we need a vaccine passport. It's totalitarian Wales. And the UK is moving closer every day. Can't even get our money back. We have reported them to the Court of Human Rights. We'll keep you posted. Love your show. Rona, thank you so much for your kind words and thanks for getting in touch. On exes, how long should you wait until you move on from an ex? Declan says, I only hold a grudge if I cheated on them. Well, I was expecting it to be the other way around, Declan, but I hear what you're saying. And also, I bump into mine in Asda. Wow. Well, Declan, you're a brave man, I've got to say. Another reason not to go to Asda, of course, I'm joking. So let's have a look at this. Yes, on Tesco, Mark, you're right. It's brainwashing, pure and simple. But also, moving on from exes, let's have a look at this. Steve says, in terms of exes, I loved a girl and was besotted with her. However, she broke wind 10 times an hour. I had to bin her. You're only human. Steve, I feel your pain. I hope that she saw her GP about that issue. Carol, I love the therapy session. Nikki knows what she's talking about. I'm in tears too, Mark. We all need a hug. We do indeed. Old Flames. Richie, hi, Mark. I met a girl who was my pen pal's best mate whilst on holiday in Germany. We had a holiday romance, but 20-odd years later, we're still good friends. We text over birthdays, Christmas, New Year and Eurovision. I met her husband. He's cool with us too. Richie, what a lovely story that warms the cockle of my heart. OK, well, look, plenty more I could get to, but I'll see if there's time at the end of the show. Thank you so much for all of your emails tonight. As you know, it's my favourite bit of the show. Still with me, my fabulous panel, Nikki Hodgson, Monty Panesar and Emily Hewitson. And news from the World Cup qualifying matches tonight. The woes for one of the world's best players, Cristiano Ronaldo, don't seem to be letting up. The forward couldn't help but shed a few tears after his Portugal side fell to a 2-1 defeat to Serbia, consigning them to the playoffs. A last-minute winner from Alexander Mitrovic sparked jubilant scenes for his country as Serbia secured a place at the next World Cup in Qatar. I've got to say a brief word on that, Monty. You are somebody that has played professional sport at the highest level. And what a credit to Cristiano Ronaldo. He's one of the richest athletes in the world and one of the most decorated, and yet still his desire to win is undimmed.
Yeah, and that's something that, you know, should be celebrated more as well, because there comes a point for every sportsman, once they've, you know, won a few games or they've won a tournament, you know, with their sort of country or their team, then your hunger starts diminishing. You're thinking, well, I've achieved what I wanted to achieve, but he keeps going. You know, I don't know, when is he going to stop? Like some of the last-minute winners against, you know, Real and Atlanta as well. And he kind of, I think he's effectively saving, you know, Olega Sostra from the sack at the moment.
That's right. I mean, we've seen him in tears. We saw Gaza famously in tears at the Euros. I think it was Euro 96, wasn't it, when we exited the tournament. But what about you? Have you ever cried on a cricket pitch?
I've never cried on a cricket pitch, but I think one of my favourite moments on a cricket pitch was when we beat Australia during the Ashes at Sydney. You know, where all of us as a group sat down on the cricket pitch and we were just like looking at each other and thinking, gosh, we've beaten Australia on Australian soil.
Yeah.
And that was one of the best feelings. And I think one of the reasons we did it, because I didn't even play any other test matches, but I was there as a squad member. Yeah. But I think the beauty of that team was because Andy Flower was brilliant as a coach. He made the squad members feel like the 11, and you know, just sitting there and being part of that experience, and you know, beating Australia in Australia is one of the great achievements for any English cricketer.
It's amazing, and what you've done in the sport is spectacular. Did you keep the hunger, or did you sort of take your foot off the gas towards the end of your career?
No, look, my hunger was probably, you know, there, but then at times, you know, you have to reinvent yourself. You know, I had a life coach all the time, and he would push me, and, you know, the conversations we would have would be about, you know, excellence, you know, performance. You know, he would give me the example of like a Duracell battery. He'll say, how long can this battery last? You've taken 5 wickets in one match. Can you keep doing it? You know, how good are you as a performer? And, you know, I would hugely advise for any sports person or anything, do have a mentor, do have a life coach, because they can actually motivate you and inspire you, you know, to keep, you know, performing at the highest level.
Well, I'm a big fan of Professor Steve Peters, who is a fantastic mind coach, a psychotherapist that wrote the book The Chimp Paradox, which is very much about that mentality of managing your emotions and achieving your full potential. And those techniques aren't just great for Cristiano Ronaldo and Monty Panesar, they're great for all of us, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think his philosophy is that emotional, you know, once we make a decision, is it an emotional decision? And if not, then we need to get into the logical state where, you know, they talk about, you know, focusing on the breathing, getting into the present moment. So, for example, if, you know, Gilchrist had hit me for a 6, what do I do? Do I take my time and then think logically, what's my next decision? What ball should I bowl?
Yeah.
And that's the great, you know, sports people, especially in T20 cricket that we've seen time again. Look, Owen Morgan has been brilliant under pressure. Under pressure, he makes some calming decisions. And you can see that. He is in that logical state of mind where he doesn't want to make a rash decision based on his emotions.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Well, do take a look at the Chimp Paradox. I'm a big fan of it. Read it a few years ago. Found it really, really helpful, actually, with some of the more basic aspects of life. In fact, I should definitely try and get Steve Peters on the show. He's a really interesting guy. He's helped a lot of athletes achieve Olympic gold with his techniques. Danny on X is, I'm over my ex, but she's clearly not over me. I saw her in the street one day and heard her whisper to her friend, what an idiot. Ooh. She's definitely still holding a candle for you. And Danny, you're too good for her, let me say that. Now, what a shock this must be to the system. Japan's former Princess Mako has departed Tokyo to start her new life in America after quitting the royal family to marry a commoner. The 32-year-old has gone from the imperial palace to a relatively modest one, a one-bedroom flat in New York costing $3,000 a month, where she was seen arriving today with her childhood sweetheart, Kei Komuro. So let me just reiterate, she's left the imperial palace. My producer Cal was telling me that the royal family in Japan is 1,000 years old, so she's left the imperial palace and she's now in a one-bedroom flat. As well as giving up her status, Princess Mako turned down a farewell payment of almost £1 million from the royals. So she's obviously keeping it real. I guess it's a sort of Japanese Megxit, isn't it, Emily?
Yeah, I mean, like, this is someone who says that they don't want to be involved in the royal family anymore and they want a private life. But compared to Meghan Markle, she's actually acting like she does. I mean, Meghan Markle gives it the big one. She says, oh, my life's so hard, I just need privacy. Then she's suddenly doing these $1 million interviews with Oprah.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, with this move to sort of normal life. I don't think I'd want to be a royal. I don't blame her for escaping the gilded cage.
That's what I was thinking about this story. I think it's, you know, the way it's been pitched in the press is, she's done this ultimate thing for love, giving up the trappings of, you know, being in the royal family. But actually it was probably quite suffocating, the limitations on her life. You know, she's got a degree, she wasn't really using that. She can now work if she wants. She could just be a normal girl, and there must be something very refreshing about that.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. What do you think about the idea of being a royal? I mean, you're sporting royalty, Monty.
Well, I haven't got an MBE yet. So, I'm waiting upon that. But
you're like David Beckham. It's about time I got knighted.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
but it's in some ways it will be an adjustment for her, won't it?
Yeah, I think it will be. But also, you know, she's like, if the relationship, you know, doesn't, let's say, work out, she's not allowed to, you know, come back and meet the family or be reintroduced into the royal family. She's completely lost her status. You know, she is not a princess anymore. She's back to just normal life like us, you know, working, you know, and working hard as ever all of us are. And, you know, this is where, you know, it will be a real test on the relationship as well, you know. Some said that, oh, he's only married her because of the fame and the money, because of, I don't know, some loan that wasn't paid for, you know. But, look, if people are in love with each other and they're happy with each other, that's what people want. If you're happy with someone, then why not? You know, why not, you know, for happiness, you know, she's made a big decision.
On houses in the countryside, Andrew has said, Mark, have you seen the price of property in the countryside? We would all love to do it, but only someone with a £10 million mansion and already has a country retreat can actually afford it. That's from Andy. Thanks for that, Andy. Chrissy says, Mark, do your homework. Kate has had a property in Chipping Norton for years. I didn't know that. That's news to me. And the opioid problem has been raging in America for years. In fact, a pharmaceutical company was taken to court several years ago and fined a vast amount for promoting the product via doctors. They were given money for giving out these opioids. Thank you so much, Chrissy, for that. Tez says, hi, Mark, great show as always. GB News is a must-watch in the mainstream media. Keep up the fantastic effort. Your great journalists do so much for us little people without a voice. Well, you may not have a voice, but you're certainly not little, not in my view. Thank you very much, Tez. And, of course, that audience is growing by the day, and I cannot thank you enough for that. So tell your friends, spread the word, and let's change the world together. Time now for this. Well, the Japanese Princess Mako going to ordinary civil life has inspired tonight's Great British Game Show. We're going to play a game of Noble or Nobody. Great work, my brilliant team behind the scenes, and special credit to Daniel for that one. Now, the rules are very simple in Noble or Nobody. All my panel have to do, and you at home, is to work out which of the people I'm about to show you is a member of the UK royal family or just a commoner like you and me. So you've got to work out the minor royal and the commoner. And you've got to basically look at that photo and you've got to work out whether they've got that sort of blue-blooded look. Can you actually tell? It's an interesting social experiment, isn't it? So how about this? Let's start with this particular individual panel. Noble or nobody? Well, he's definitely got a body, hasn't he?
Yeah, Greek god vibes, I'm guessing.
I don't think he's too worried about his exes. I think they're more worried about him, aren't they? What do we think? What do we think? Is this guy royal or not?
I don't know, his teeth are almost too good to be royal, so I think he's a nobody.
You think he's a nobody? What do you all think about this?
I think he's royal. He's giving me that kind of like golden, like, he's just got that tanned body, you know, that just natural gleam. Yeah, I'm going to go for a noble.
OK, and you're going, Monty?
I reckon he's probably, you know, in the Marines, you know, working hard with that sort of, you know, fit body.
Yeah.
And every royal, I think, does their time in the Marines.
Well, you are absolutely spot on. He is noble. He is royalty. It's 22-year-old Arthur Chatto, the grandson of Princess Margaret, 30th in line to the throne. The hunk is the first royal since Prince Edward in '86 to train with the Marines. Great, great spot there, Monty. He's also a personal trainer and last year rode 2,000 miles circumventing Great Britain for charity. He sounds amazing. Well done, Arthur Chatto. He's getting it done. OK, next up, let's have a look at this option. It's a lady. Is it noble or nobody?
That looks like one of those stock images that you get when you're looking for a skiing holiday. It's like, come here to my beautiful chalet.
Yeah, I didn't think we still had CNA in this country, but...
Yeah, I'm going to go for nobody. I think you know, when you think of a royal, you get that picture. I think that's the trick
It's
here.
the right answer. It's US actress Vanessa Ray, whose credits include playing Meghan Markle's love rival in Suits. So she's Hollywood royalty, but not actual blue-blooded royalty. Next up, how about this? Who have we got here? There you go, this rather friendly-looking man with a beard.
Surely he hasn't been into Buckingham Palace before.
Noble or nobody? Yeah, he looks like he'd be escorted out by security guards.
But is that
what
the
do we
trick?
think?
Is that the trick?
That's the thing, you don't really know, do you? I mean, does he look a bit scruffy to be a royal?
He looks like he could be Prince Harry's dad, actually, but, you know.
I mean, he's holding a lot of money. Is that money he's got?
Oh.
What's the cash?
See, that's not very royal to sort of show your wealth,
Well,
is
it depends if you're on the outskirts of royalty, though, doesn't it?
Buy a nicer top with that money, I reckon.
I mean, look, can I say one thing? He's scruffy, and the real aristocrats are known for being quite scruffy.
Yeah.
Very often, they've got, like, frayed collars on their shirts
Well,
and
they're
frayed
too
cuffs.
busy trying to heat the houses, aren't they?
Yes, and they're driving around in rusty Volvos. So what do we think? Noble or nobody?
Let's go with noble.
He's noble!
Hey.
It's the right answer. It's Lord Ivor Mountbatten, cousin of the Queen, who in 2018 tied the knot with partner James Coyle in the royal family's first gay wedding. He also appeared on the reality show Treasure Island with Bear Grylls, which explains why he posed with a load of cash. I'm loving all these posh royals. They seem like brilliant people. What about this one? Let's power through the last few. OK. Noble or nobody?
I know who that is. Definitely noble.
Go on, then.
I think it's Lady Gabriella, is it?
It's Lady Amelia Windsor.
There we go.
And you're absolutely right. Granddaughter of the Queen's cousin, the Duke of Kent, 43rd in line to the throne. She's pictured with her sister, Lady Marina, in the celebration for the Queen's 90th birthday in 2016. OK, how about this one? Noble or nobody?
Nobody. He looks like a detective from some show.
Well, he's actually the BAFTA-winning creator of Netflix series The Crown. So he's a nobody in the royal circles, but he is, of course, a legend of TV and film. How about this one? Next, I think that's it for the game.
Noble.
And I want to say really well done. And Nikki is the winner of that particular contest, so well done. I want to thank my amazing panel. I think you'd agree they've been fantastic tonight. I've had loads of emails saying how great you are, so please return, all three of you. Most importantly, thanks to my amazing team who worked so hard today, and to you for your company. I've loved every second. I hope you have too. And Dan Wootton is back in the hot seat tomorrow at 9. See you next Friday.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk. Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
The Cambridge Union cancels a number of speakers, then John Cleese cancels the Cambridge Union, then the Cambridge Union uncancels the cancelled speakers. This is Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle.